seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
What? If you like your doctor, you will be able to keep your doctor.
What difference at this point does it make?
Doesn't make sense.
If you're looking to make sense out of what's going on in the world today, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Southern Sense Talk Radio with your host, Annie, the radio chick Ubelis, and featuring Curtis C.S. Bennett and the most interesting guests that you'll find anywhere on internet radio. And you can join the show and let your voice be heard by dialing 917-889-3675. So sit back, relax, and remember, Southern sense is common sense.
When an emergency strikes, what's your first impulse? If your answer is run to the grocery store, you're likely to find chaos and plenty of empty shelves. So how do you avoid this? Well, it's simple. You use today to make a plan, to prepare for things that may happen. It's a hurricane, earthquake, blizzard, or even social unrest, especially in today's political environment. The practical place to start is by storing up food in your home. And I use My Patriot Supply for my food storage. If you don't have an emergency food supply, it's time to do so. Here's a great item that makes it really simple. A 2-week food kit that comes in a rugged tote. And it's only $75 when you go to my special website, preparewithsouthernsense.com, or call 888-441-7290. This food kit includes breakfast, lunch, and dinners that will last up to 25 years on your storage shelves. So order now and prepare yourself, and then rest easy. So it's very simple. Just call 888-441-7290 or go to preparewithsouthernsense.com. You know what? Let's make it even more simple than that. You're listening to my show, and it's called Southern Sense, and you know you put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com, and click on the icon for My Patriot Food.
All right. Oh, man, I'm a little off the beat today. You're listening to Southern Sense live on Blog Talk Radio, SHR Media, the Lone Star Daily News, iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, currently up on Facebook as well as YouTube. So join us over there. Just go to our website. It's the name of the show. Put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com. Of course, I'm your hostess with the mostest, the radio chick, Annie, along with my oh-so-patient, debonair, and intellectual co-host, Curtis C.S. Bennett. Good afternoon, Curtis. I'm on a roll today. I can mess up a wet dream.
Well, that's two of us. I got some adjustments to make myself. One is the cool weather. Today I woke up and it's like wintertime for the first time. And tomorrow, I think clocks go back here. So
Oh, really?
I have to make that adjustment.
Oh, geez. I'm glad you told me.
Yep.
You reminded me. Oh, man. You know, the worst part is it was
Oh, yeah.
in the 50s over here, because I'm just about 3 hours away from you. And we put a hot tub up on our back porch. You know, the back porch is all screened in and nice. It's on cement slab. So we finally erected the hot tub. And Yanni goes outside to start warming it up. So when I get off the air, I can dive into it. And he goes, it's 50 degrees outside. And I'm going, I don't know about that.
Yeah, it was cold this morning. Wow.
Anyway.
It was a shock.
Oh, I would say that would be a definite shock. We've got a great lineup today. We're actually doing a bit of a change up. And we have normally the dedication at the start at the show to a fallen hero. Today's dedication, we're going to be joined with Paul Boutin. I know I probably just mispronounced his last name. He is the founder of 9th of November Press. And he published a book out there called Judgment in Moscow. It's a story that was written by Vladimir Bukovsky. And I was supposed to do an interview with Vladimir back in August, and that was around when everything started happening with me. I ended up in anaphylactic shock. I just had 3 molars pulled. I'm still dealing with the molars, my teeth being pulled. I can't even say the word. Still under pain medication for that because it was really nasty. And I was supposed to call him, do the interview, record it, and then broadcast it at a later date. And unfortunately, this past week, Vladimir Bukovsky has passed away. It goes to show you should never, ever, ever wait too long to do something that you really, truly wanted to do. So the publisher of the book, Paul Boutin, is going to be joining us. He will help us with the dedication. He should be calling in any minute now. And if he is, I see numbers popping up in the studio. If you are our guest, please press 1. That way I know it's you and I can bring you on. So we're going to be doing a special dedication to Vladimir Bukovsky. And Curtis, that's my backup number that you just clicked on. That's not Paul. So don't worry about that. All right. Anyway, thanks, Curtis, for trying anyway. All right. Who did you just bring on, Curtis? Curtis?
I didn't get a chance to check yet.
Oh, all
so
right.
Let me find out who that is.
Okay. All right. Anyway, we've got Paul will be calling in a few moments. We also have the spokesperson for the National GOP. She will be calling back into the show today, Liz Harrington. We're going to follow up with Michael LaPierre, who is challenging Lindsey Graham for his Senate seat here in South Carolina. And we have a challenger on the Republican side. There's actually several of them, but this is one candidate I think is the strongest, Eric Early, who may have the best chance to turn Adam Schiff's seat back to red. So Eric Early will be joining us towards the end of the show. So there's so much to do, so much to talk about, Curtis. And I want to thank everyone that's sitting here listening in on Facebook, YouTube, as well as in the chat room here. So, yeah, Curtis, I think that person that you just looked at the studio is someone who calls in and listens all the time on the line. So I want to thank that caller, uses Skype to call in. And I've got a lot of faithful listeners out there. So that said, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, anyway, we're going to be talking about the resolution that just passed in the House to start the inquiry that has already been started weeks ago into impeachment of Donald Trump. And this is what's so strange.
What a farce.
Yeah. 3 times the House has moved to impeach a president. 3 times. Each time, before the inquiry started, there was an underlying crime or abuse of power that was proven. In this case, they're doing an investigation to find a crime. Instead of saying, all right, this has occurred, the president has abused his powers, or the president has committed a crime, let's do the investigation, let's bring witnesses, get evidence forward, and determine whether or not we should move on impeachment. It's done the opposite. It's done completely backwards. Let's see if we can find a crime. Let's accuse them of anything possible. Let's go out there and make up testimony like Adam Schiff did. It's known as gaslighting. Let's just make something up and then make charges around that, which is exactly what is going on. Now, I was saying 2020 is going to see a huge change. We're going to see a large change.
Oh, definitely.
So,
I mean, the people are not going to put up with this too much longer. You know, I mean, we're at the point now where I'm ready to vote today. Get this over with.
Well, actually, here in South Carolina, we already have absentee voting going on. So, folks, check out your state and find out whether or not you've got early voting, absentee voting, whatever it is, and just get out there. If you got a friend or neighbor, a family member, talk to them. If they haven't voted lately, talk to them. Give them a ride to the polling place. Help them to get their voice out there. Start talking to people all around the place. I mean, when Trump was running for office, I started talking out to a lot of my friends and everything else, asking them, where'd you stand on this? Have you voted? And I had two friends that had never voted. Can you believe this? These are two individuals in their 70s, never casted a vote.
Yeah.
And I said, you sit here.
I know people like that.
You pitch a bitch about what is going on around you, and you've got the most powerful weapon in your hands, your vote. Make it heard. And do you know what? For the first time in 2016, they casted a vote in the presidential race, and they voted for Trump. I said, so important. You may think your vote may not mean something, but if you've got someone on the left that's voting for Clinton and you do not cast your vote for Trump, you're giving your vote to Clinton. And they never thought of it that way. I said, so what? Someone casted a vote for Trump. Negate that vote by casting your vote. And it's the most powerful way into getting the message heard across the nation. So in 2020, folks, there is no excuse for you to be sitting on your ass and not voting. So I do believe we have our guest in on the line right now, and I know I'm going to mispronounce his last name. Welcome aboard to Paul Boutin. Am I saying that correctly or wrong?
That was very close. You don't speak Canadian French, it's okay. It's Boutin in French, and I accept all pronunciations. It's great to be here. Hello, Annie.
Well, I have to say, je suis étudiant français dans l'école. So I can't speak it too well. I forgot what I learned in high school. Enough said. I speak more New Yorker than anything else, even though I'm here in South Carolina. So forget about it. Oh, man. Now, I was telling our listeners that, we start off each and every show with a dedication to a fallen hero. And normally it's someone in the military, a first responder, someone of outstanding courage that has done something that should be remembered and noteworthy. And I have to apologize because I did have the interview set up with Vladimir Bukovsky, and I went through a series of health issues, so I never got back to him. I actually spoke to him on the phone. True story. I called him. We had scheduled the interview for around 9 o'clock my time. Or was it 9 o'clock his time? Because he was in Cambridge, England. And I call him, and I hear a lot of laughter in the background, glasses clinking, people talking in Russian. And he gets on the phone. It's so nice, so wonderful to talk with him. And he goes, "Oh, we had an interview now." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Oh, I have company." And you could hear he's having one heck of a party going on in the background. I said, "Okay, I'll reschedule for a later date." And that's when all my health issues kicked in. I never got a chance to call him back. We did have something scheduled, but I just never got to finish the interview. And I feel so bad and I feel so guilty because he is someone the world should know.
Well, I'm touched. And I'm sure he would joke in that dark Russian way that he's been about to die for about 5 years now. So it was a surprise. He has been in and out of the hospital. I've been told that he was near death, and he kept bouncing back. And this time was different, and it was just finally his time. So unfortunately, yes. But we did get his last book out 5 months ago. And that was a great thing to be able to do, was to get Judgment in Moscow published in English. He wrote it in 1995. It's been published in 9 languages. It was a hit in France. And in the West, he had a deal with Random House, but the editor, in a series of back and forth letters, one of which is in the book, wanted him to rewrite the book. And let me be fair rather than judgmental. The editor was concerned that this book would come out. It's based on, I guess I should back up a bit, Vladimir, who was kicked out of college for having the wrong pamphlets and being a poet who wrote about the government, was declared psychiatrically ill, which is a common trick back then to avoid a trial. They lock you up, quote, for your own good, unquote, and just like Catch-22 or Cuckoo's Nest, you can get out if you sign a piece of paper that you're schizophrenic and all your writings don't make sense. And when he finally got out, he continued to participate in protests, was arrested again, got back out, found a way to get the medical documents of 6 prestigious, well-known outside of Russia dissidents, their psychiatric hospital papers. These were people like him who had been locked up. Got them smuggled to the West, I think to France. The International Psychiatric Association looked at these and said, these people are not schizophrenic. These people are being obviously locked up as political prisoners. Huge scandal. Russia was thrown out of the Psychiatric Association. He went back to jail, which he knew was coming. Glad that was the choice he made, and was such a troublemaker in prison, where it was sort of like a very darkly comic Hogan's Heroes of how can we mess with the camp commander today, and how can we pull things under their nose, like teaching the other prisoners a new slang, which turns out to be English, so that when they get out, they can communicate with people in the West about what's going on. And finally, he was such a problem that in 1976, the highest profile prisoner trade between the communist world and the West happened. And on the West, it was the head of the Chilean Communist Party who was in prison there under Pinochet. And in the East, it was Vladimir Bukovsky. We need him not just out of prison, but out of the country. He's too much trouble. He lived in England from 1976 on. He wrote a memoir about his prison life, which was by turns sad and angry and hilarious of the things they could do in prison, and just the comical, hypocrisy of what they dealt with. Also, what it's like to go without cigarettes when you're a smoker. And he's such a good writer. And he got such a good translator, Michael Scammell, who's legendary in his own work, from Russian to English, that the book, To Build a Castle, became a national bestseller, an international bestseller in 1978. Vladimir Bukovsky was on Good Morning America between Ryan and Tatum O'Neill and Joanne Woodward one morning. Vladimir Bukovsky was an hour-long guest on Firing Line with Buckley one Thursday night in 78. President Carter invited him to the White House under the condition of no press photography because they knew that a photo would upset people in the Kremlin. And you might know that President Ford took Kissinger's advice and wouldn't let Solzhenitsyn come to the White House at all. Carter took the step, but still back then, this is how it was no photos. It's very touchy. And Bukovsky, ever since, he went to Stanford, he went to Cambridge University, he finished his studies. He was very interested in neuropsychology. I'm going to get the word wrong. But he always kept saying, he informally advised Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. He said, Gorbachev's not your friend. He's KGB. And Vladimir kept trying to get, somehow, if he could get top secret Kremlin papers in the archives. Well, eventually, the wall came down, the Soviet Union collapsed, and at the time, Yeltsin and Bukovsky were friends. So Yeltsin said, I need you here to testify in this trial where the former Communist Party members are suing me in our legal court to get their property that they'd stolen from the people that I took back from them. You know, you get the idea.
Yeah.
And Bukovsky saw his chance. He said, I would glad to come and help you. I will need access to the top secret archives, which he got. And it's in Judgment in Moscow, his new book. And well, it's a 24-year-old book, but it's new in English. How he got in there, and he brought a laptop, and he brought some device that looked like a lamp that connected to the laptop. It was a brand new Japanese scanner that no one knew what it was. He scanned 4,000 pages of top secret documents before they kicked him out. And the book is based on that. The title, Judgment in Moscow, is based on the early 60s film Judgment at Nuremberg, which he actually got to see in college. He said it was a surprise they showed that in communist-era college, and it moved him. Like, a trial, that's what we need. We need a trial for the communists and for communism to say that these are crimes against humanity and that the world rejects their ideology and their methods so that, like with Nazism, it will never rise again. Well, that didn't happen. But the book, which we've finally got out as a volunteer effort with some backers and a few very professional people so that it looks like Random House. It's got a great cover. It's good paper, hardcover, paperback, Kindle, and professionally copy edited. And we fact-checked all 388 footnotes to make sure those documents are correct and still exist. Lays out a story of what is in these papers that he found. And what we see in there goes all the way from, very briefly, Stalin writing down very quickly on a tiny piece of paper. You can see he's in a hurry. Yes, kill another 6,000 people in that district. He doesn't care who. And you feel like he's late for the ballet or something. And we have a scan of that online. And then further forward, Brezhnev meeting with his new head of the KGB, Andropov. And yes, they're talking about what to do about this kid, Vladimir Bukovsky. What a troublemaker. We can't kill him. We can't put him in jail. What do we do? This was 1969 or 70. But going forward, the important thing was how many meetings were held with leading members of European governments, the Socialist Party in Sweden, of the usual suspects we all know in Germany and in France even, and all these leaders who would at the time have denied it, covertly meeting. And rather than judge them, let's look at what's going on. The Soviet Union is right next door, right? They can see Russia from their house for real. And what they're trying to do usually is figure out some way that they can work out a deal with Russia. It's not money. People don't want suitcases of cash. They want to be in power. It's like, hey, we'll be one pole of Europe and you'll be the other. That's actually one of the memos. And there was a lot of wheeling and dealing attempts behind the scenes. And the opening paper he publishes in the book that really tells you how far it had gone was the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. These are a half dozen busy men, okay, taking a vote saying, yes, let's send a birthday present to the head of the Social Democratic Party in Sweden for all the covert work he's done for us. Generally, I think if the Central Committee votes to send you a birthday present, you're probably in too deep with them.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot more. And I made to really keep it really short, just at the point so we find that, yes, they did fund the Black Panthers, and what starts out as talking about the oppression of African Americans in America turns into, this would be a great way to distract Nixon from foreign policy, so let's do it. And yes, they funded unilateral disarmament groups in the UK, which is one reason they were so well organized and had such great signs and so forth, was there was Soviet funding. Like, oh, we'd love it if England took down their missiles. Let's help them out. We find that going forward, that in Afghanistan, there's a point where there's a document that acknowledges that the Soviet military leader in Afghanistan is kind of been kidding himself and telling us things are going great, and actually I'm here and they're terrible. We're getting our ass kicked, and they fight to keep control of Poland when Lech Walesa is rising to power, and they keep Poland, but it also comes with $50 billion of debt that they can't afford already. And my favorite, to me, this was funny, was where one of the members of the committee says something that nobody in America seems to want to admit. He said, Reagan with his strategic defense initiative is bankrupting us, folks. I'm not kidding. This Star Wars is going to drive us broken out of business. That really was happening. So the one I saved for last, and I think this was where Bukovsky had felt like he fought in vain trying to get Thatcher and Reagan to understand, was that Gorbachev is not our friend. That he's not trying to end the Soviet Union. He's trying to keep it in power by making concessions. The sort of thing that goes all the way back to détente in the 70s, which, again, Bukovsky goes on about for many, many pages, is it looks like a concession on their part, but as we now say about Putin, if you sit down at the table with him, you've lost already. So Gorbachev, the moment that struck me was the meeting, and these are stenographed meeting notes, where one of the other people in the meeting tells him, the Chinese government has the soldiers killed 3,000 protesters in Tiananmen Square. And Gorbachev's quoted reply is 3,000, so what?
That's
a very different picture from the Gorbachev we saw in the media.
Absolutely, absolutely. He paints such wonderful pictures with his words, and it's something like 700 pages or so. And I got to tell you, Elizabeth, she sent me the first draft copy before it was fully edited, and then she kept on sending me the updates. So every time I started to read the book, I had to go back to the newer version. And she even sent me the printed galley copy, which I have with me here. But when you listen to his voice, you hear not just his humor, but you also hear the frustration he has. And you mentioned the Nuremberg trials. He felt that when communism fell, it should have been Nuremberg-style trials for those that were in power that took so many lives. And it never happened.
Yes, exactly.
It never, and you could hear the frustration. But when I say humor, I'm thinking back, you mentioned that part with the scanner and the top secret memos that he was scanning in. I'm laughing because he's doing it right in under their noses. They're watching him do this, not understanding what he was doing when he scanned confidential, top secret things that should never have left the room, that you're only allowed to have for just a short time in your possession, but must return under the penalty of death. And he's just thousands of these pages just scanning in, and then having a whole crew put them all together to figure out exactly what was going on behind closed doors.
Yes. By the way, that entire set is available online, and I'll send you the URL if you want. It's also, I think, the Hoover Institution at Stanford. But see, what this book does is, do you want to look at 4,000 pages in Russian? Most people don't, even historians. And what he does is tell a narrative from selected parts and fit it into what was going on, which got me to read it twice, actually 3 times as the editor.
I think I got one up on you.
Let me back up a bit. I want to give a shout out to our volunteers who start with Alyona Kojevnikov, the former bureau chief of Radio Liberty in Moscow, a translator for Margaret Thatcher back in the day, who did this translation and treated this book as if it were her own in terms of just being so careful. And that's one reason things were very fussy and rewritten. And what to leave out, what has to stay in, how to word things exactly in the translation. It was amazing. She really, really owned the book. I've edited a lot of people, and she just, I think she knew the book better than he did by the time she was done. And many, many people who just gave their time one way or another, from fact-checking to going to find research librarians who would help us look up footnotes, a professional copy editor, two of them, a professional typesetter who gave us an incredible discount, even though he was probably because he's so fast that it didn't take him as much time as it might. But still, honestly, everyone with this book, the whole thing was everybody plans how long they're going to take, and they say, I'll do it. And it took 2 to 3 times as long for every step of the way. But here we are. And the Library of Congress contacted us and said, yeah, we want 2 copies. So it's important to get his message out, I think. And I want to tell you, yes, that chapter in where he goes to the archives is called, the title is In the Belly of the Beast, is worth the book alone. It's hilarious because he gets to the archives, which is a building in Moscow with all these top secret documents going back decades, all the way to Stalin. And the Soviet Union has fallen apart, and everybody's broke. Okay, look, these people have no money. They're broke. I was there in 93, 94. People were broke. Grandmothers are selling their sweaters on the street. Bukovsky gets to the archives, and every single person there, every clerk in the library, every officer, he says, okay, I'm here. Here's my papers from Yeltsin. I have to get access. And he describes, right, like the look on their faces where they're thinking, how much should I charge this guy? What deal should I make with him? There's obviously some money in this, or why would he be here? And the mistake that everybody made over there, which is is how they thought that he was taking these documents to sell them in the West, which he wasn't at all. There really wasn't that much value. It was about getting the truth out, showing what they really said at the meeting, showing who was there. That in the early 70s, American media, ABC, Francis Ford Coppola, at the very least, got somewhere along the way of trying to broker a deal to do documentaries about life in the Soviet Union. And the condition was the Central Committee approves every frame. Mm-hmm. And in the documents, they say that all these people are on board. That was one of the reasons Random House didn't want to publish it. They said, you can't have that in there. And the editor even wrote, he said, I agree with you, but this is, you're accusing people, et cetera. You can see, he didn't want to be the guy who published that book. Nobody did. He tried to have it published in England with a small publisher, and literally a team of lawyers showed up and said, under British libel laws at the time, it would be very easy to bankrupt you if you dare to publish this book, and that's what we'll do. So here we are, a bunch of us who have nothing to sue us for, and we live in America, so the beauty of it was the timing of it is finally, we started this in 2016. You mentioned Elizabeth Childs, who has actually spearheaded this whole thing. She's a huge Bukovsky admirer. His book changed her life. She wanted to help him. And I said to her, as a 20-year friend, I said, I'd be glad to help you. I don't know why. It sounds like the right thing to do, but who's going to care about a book about Western politicians colluding with Russians? And of course, we walked right into this book being very topical. I'm talking too much. Your turn.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely wonderful, because, he does speak out about the West. He points out where different politicians, say in Spain, in Italy, in Finland, in Sweden, things you would think as being totally Western, their connections to the Central Committee, making direct links either through propaganda pamphlets or through money donated. But he also puts the finger in the eye of us here in America. And he was very disdainful of us as Americans, because he spent 12 years fighting for freedom, fighting for what is right. From a mental hospital to a prison, to the point where even the prisoners, that were criminals, respected him.
He could have got out of, right? All he had to do was recant, and he would have avoided all that, and he didn't. But keep going, please.
No,
so he's been through all that, and then he gets to America.
And he's looking at us.
You're on roll.
Thanks. But we squander our freedoms. We are so arrogant that the grace and the glory we have before us, we just toss in the trash heap for material things, for power, for lust, for whatever feels good at the moment, instead of understanding how precious our liberty and freedoms are.
Mm-hmm. Some people were very put off by the part early on where he launches into a tirade against Americans. These are the people he met when he was at Stanford, okay, in Palo Alto, California, just below San Francisco. And I found it hilarious because it's kind of true. Imagine, right? You're a Russian. You've been through all this stuff, right? You come to America, and everyone seems like a wimp. Everyone seems not very intellectual. Everyone seems, he says, they're like, they always have some fad, like it was jogging when he got here in '76. And we seemed like big babies to him. And I did actually, with some of the other people on the book, they're like, this is going to offend people. I'm like, I'm laughing. This is so true. This is me. This is totally me. You know, my neighbor's dog died. I need to see a therapist. That's actually something he saw.
Oh, we have safe zones. Safe zones. How dare you wear the American flag? I'm offended. Oh, my goodness. I mean,
my father was, my grandparents were French-Canadian immigrants, and we're not going to talk about me a lot, but just so you understand. French-Canadian immigrants to Maine, the KKK came up and marched against them. Get out, you dirty Catholics. You're not Americans, you know. And my dad, born in 1920, fought under Patton in the Battle of the Bulge. Need I explain? Captured, 9 months in prison camp, liberated by the Russian army. He said they're worse than the Germans. And so for me, when I see these people who are like, well, my career, I don't know, that might harm my career if I admit to what I really feel or if I stick to my belief. And I work with a lot of people in tech, and I just read an essay by a very good friend about Silicon Valley where there's this thing, you know, she said that people say, oh, it's just business. Well, no, it's not. It's people's lives. You're putting microphones in their house, and you know that they're being listened in on. You know it's being recorded. You've got your PR people wording it to sound like they're not, but actually they are. And you've got, you know, invasions of privacy. You're working with people that behind the scenes against your own policies. Oh, we stopped that. No, you didn't. It's still going on. And that people tell themselves that there was an episode of the TV show Silicon Valley where it just came up where they start with, this is just wrong. This is just wrong. We can't do this. 30 seconds later, they're telling each other, well, you know, it's bad in the service of good. It's unethical in defense of ethics. And this is what Bukovsky said, this is what people do, one slip at a time. He understood the people who recanted so they wouldn't spend the rest of their life in a labor camp because of some poems. But he said that what happens when you start constantly giving in for your own comfort, for your convenience, because, you know, he doesn't look at it from the big level. He's not looking at the White House. He's looking at the individual. And in fact, I actually queued up 2 paragraphs. I thought for people who've never read him, there are 2 paragraphs that I think would explain exactly his worldview. And I'd listened up on some of your show, and I think that people will understand. I think this, can I read this?
Sure, absolutely, please.
In an extreme situation, there's a distinction between the behavior of an individual and that of the human crowd. A people, nation, class, party, or simply crowd cannot go beyond a certain limit in a crisis. The instinct of self-preservation proves too strong. They can sacrifice a part in the hope of saving the rest. They can break up into smaller groups and seek salvation that way. But this is their downfall. To be alone is an enormous responsibility. With his back to the wall, a man understands, I am the people. I am the nation. I am the party. I am the class, and there is nothing else at all. He cannot sacrifice a part of himself, cannot split himself up or divide into parts and still live. There's nowhere for him to retreat to. And the instinct of self-preservation instead drives him to extremes. He prefers physical death to a spiritual one. The end.
Man, I am so sorry I never got to do the complete interview, but I did get a chance to talk to him, but never did the full interview. And I am kicking myself from here to Kingdom Come, because he ends the book with a very poignant line that speaks about exactly what you just said. His final line is, the only thing I can do now is to preserve my testimonies up until the last judgment. And I think that's every one of us have to make that decision. We all have moral cowardice somewhere along the way, but we've got to overcome it. And he took it to such a length and lived such a life that should be the perfect example for pure Americanism. This is what our founding fathers had. They fought the moral battle, and they stood their ground. But today, we're weak. We're cowardly. We go with the herd mentality. We do whatever is just the rest of the crowd says, whether it's transgenderism being taught to our kids in kindergarten or letting the government decide what type of toilet we install in our house. We've lost our will to be independently fierce. And this is what his book addresses. And, sometimes I'm ashamed on the way I sometimes back down and stuff. And he proved that you shouldn't have to do that. Stay with the fight, because in the end, he's going to win.
Paul.
Yes.
I know you said this book was written about 24 years ago, but did Vladimir ever express any opinions or views on Obama and his relationship with Putin?
No, and I'm actually not going to go there because it's not my business to speak for him, except to say, I will say that if you're looking for any Russian influence, it's you never know where it's going to turn up. And I should stop there.
Absolutely, absolutely.
They try everyone.
I'm just curious if he ever expressed anything.
No, he hits both sides. He doesn't care. He'll tell you, here, the Communist Party has infiltrated, the Communist Party has influenced. This is where they are making the narrative, and you're not. And he points it out. But he's also sympathetic to not just the prisoner that he served with, but also to the jailer, understanding where they were coming from, too. He gives both sides.
Thanks. I wanted to get that in, that one of his best essays was about against the use of torture by the United States. And he talked about how he had been tortured and how he saw that the people who had to torture him, they were saying, please, let us just not do this. And they were ordered to by someone who didn't want to lose his job. And he said, those guys never could look me in the eye again. And they felt like what they did hurt them in a way beyond the pain they inflicted on him. And that I think it's in To Build a Castle. At one point, he's out of prison, he's in Moscow. On the street, he sees a drunk wreck and realizes, oh, it's one of my former guards. This is what happens to them. And that's part of it. When you go along, when you just follow orders, when you do what you know you shouldn't, it destroys you inside.
Now, you do this all too well. The name of the book is Judgment in Moscow. There's a link on the show page, so when people listen in the archives, they'll click on the link and get the book. But people can also find you at 9th of November, which is a very important date. I think it's a date we should all celebrate, the day the Berlin Wall came down. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. The 9th of November. Paul, you have been an absolute angel, and I definitely want you to have come back on because these are important issues, and to show how Vladimir Bukovsky should be a shining example to every American, to every freedom-loving person throughout the world. Thank you, Paul, for so much.
Okay, thank you, Annie. Talk to you later.
All right, God bless. All right, Paul Boutin, and it's Judgment in Moscow, which you can find at 9th of November. Let's welcome back the spokesperson to the RNC, the GOP, Liz Harrington. Good afternoon, Liz. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm just nuts as always. Absolutely always. I mean, has the world gone upside down and crazy? I thought Nancy Pelosi would only go ahead with an impeachment inquiry vote if she had bipartisan support. Do you see any here?
In fact, she had bipartisan opposition. She had two Democrats who joined all the Republicans in voting against this sham resolution. I mean, what are they even voting for? They're voting for rules and procedures for an inquiry that doesn't exist, that was never authorized, based on past precedent, based on any other Congress that has undertaken such an enormous endeavor as to undo our votes, to undo the will of the American people. You would think they would have some semblance of a fair process, and yet they don't. They have Adam Schiff in the basement of the Capitol, twisting arms, leaning on witnesses, shutting down Republicans, questions. You know, what happened to the whistleblower? All of a sudden, we're not allowed to ask about who this person is who's trying to overthrow a duly elected president. It's such a sham. But the good news is people see through it, and they're so sick and tired of this.
You know, I had a laugh because they're saying they're having rules for an inquiry that already started. There are 6 different committees looking at him, and I'm trying to see if I have the names of the different committees. I did pull it up last night. Oh, here we go. The House Intelligence Committee, Foreign Affairs, Financial Services, Judiciary, the Ways and Means Committees. He's being investigated 6 ways to Sunday. What there is there?
Exactly. And this has been going on since the Democrats got into office in the House. I mean, this has been going on from the holdovers in the Justice Department since before he was even elected. They were investigating him. There's nothing to find. It's absolutely absurd. And we have to hear over and over and over again, they're accusing President Trump of what the Democrats did. They're the ones that solicited foreign dirt. They're the ones who had a DNC operative working with a Ukrainian member of parliament, a Ukrainian ambassador, trying to leak and sabotage against the Trump campaign. I mean, a Ukrainian court ruled that they meddled in our election against Donald J. Trump. So it's just preposterous to now try for the Democrats to turn the tables on President Trump when he did nothing wrong here. And it's such a sham. And first it was Russia for 2.5 years. It was a complete lie. We wasted $32 million on that witch hunt. And now we've moved over to Ukraine for investigations about a phone call we can all read for ourselves. Why can't the Democrats get over the results of 2016? I can tell you why. Because they're worried about losing in 2020.
Oh, they will. Big time.
Liz.
Go ahead, Curtis.
Liz.
Yes.
It's so obvious to myself, and I'm sure a lot of other Americans, that this whole thing is a sham. And to me, it's kind of criminal in nature because they're trying to take down, as we know, a duly elected president. And I'm wondering, is there a way that the Senate could shut this down?
I mean, the Senate, I feel we should be starting to push back and do their own investigation into this complaint, right? There needs to be an investigation into how this whole thing started, which what we already know is really damning when you look at what Adam Schiff was up to. He was the one who was colluding with this registered Democrat in the CIA, he didn't go to the Inspector General first. Where did he go? To the Democrat hacks on the Intelligence Committee. And so he went there and then filed an urgent concern, of course, after he got set up with Democrat attorneys recommended to him by the Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff's committee. And then what does he do? He files a quote-unquote urgent concern 19 days after the phone call. This is so manufactured. It's so scripted. And what did we find? What did we find? All the hysteria, all the leaks surrounding this anonymous complaint and all this hysteria, it didn't turn out to be true. President Trump released the transcript. You can read it for yourself. The favor he asked for was actually getting to the bottom of 2016, which is something that Democrats used to be heavily invested in, but only when they were looking for a white whale against President Trump, not when they're looking for the actual bad actors who were the Democrats. DNC, Christopher Steele hired him, foreign national, digging up dirt, going throughout the world against President Trump, but it was all untrue. It was all lies. Even the FBI was paying this guy who worked with Fusion GPS and Glenn Simpson to spread disinformation into the highest levels of the Obama administration. This is appalling, and I think, we're going to get to the bottom of this, and that's another reason why the Democrats have to change the narrative, have to try to damage President Trump politically, because it is not looking good when you look at the evidence that is piling up against the Obama administration and what the CIA, the DOJ, and the FBI, State Department, and elsewhere were doing against then candidate Trump and then his transition team.
It stings to high heaven, and somewhere along the way, the American people are going to have to say enough is enough, because so many other things are not being done. All we get 24/7 now is this impeachment inquiry, which is unconstitutional. He's not allowed to have his own witnesses. He's not allowed to view the evidence. He's not allowed to question anyone. No one is able to go anything past what Adam Schiff allows, which is a complete farce, but nothing's being done on health care. Nothing is being done in any other legislation that's sitting there. We've got, I believe it's 17 states that have vote harvesting, which explains why so many areas in California went blue that were traditionally red. And we're not making the other important issues out there. It's all Trump impeachment syndrome.
They're obsessed. They've been obsessed with the results of 2016. They've been trying to overturn that since day one. And, but you said people are going to have to say that they've had enough. We're seeing that. We're raising record amount of fundraising, first-time donors, people who've never given before in their life because they see through this. They say enough is enough. We need to get involved. We need to fight back because this is what it's so about. We finally have a president in the White House who's working on behalf of the country. He's not working on behalf of the elites. He's not working on behalf of the Beltway class. He's putting the country first, and it's working. Look at the great jobs report we had again today. Every month, the monthly reminder of how incredible a job President Trump is doing, just by restoring confidence into Americans, getting the government out of the way and getting people off the sidelines back to work. Democrats can't attack him on the issues. They can't attack him on substance. They're always, now Republicans are just talking about process over substance. Let's talk substance. Let's talk substance not only of this phone call, which was perfectly fine. Let's talk substance on the economy. Let's talk substance on health care, where you have Elizabeth Warren saying, socialist Bernie Sanders, his $32 trillion Medicare for all, quote-unquote Medicare for all, which is actually socialized medicine plan, is not enough. I'm going to take you a step further. I'm going to say it's going to be $52 trillion, more than the entire double what the entire national debt is. Okay, let's talk about substance. Let's talk about how the Democrats would absolutely destroy our health care in this country as we know it. And they don't have an answer. They do not have an answer on this economy. They don't have an answer on any of these issues. The border, they want open borders. They're going so far to the left. And it's emblematic of how they're running things on the primary. They're going so far to the left. And in the House, they're so far to the left, doing this commiserate of justice with Adam Schiff, it's a Soviet show trial where they've convicted President Trump before they even had the transcript, had any evidence on their side. So it's all just a sham, but that's why we're going to win. That's why people are so sick and tired of it, and that's why we're going to be propelled to not just keep the White House, not just keep the Senate, but turn the House back into our favor as well.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned socialism. because something that our chairperson of the GOP, Rhonda McDaniels, did, she came up with this new program called Victims of Socialism. Because this is what we're seeing. We're seeing Adam Schiff go full communist on us. And you guys over there at the GOP have put together this program where you have actual victims of socialism step forward and speak out to what the truth is about it.
Absolutely. It's so important. We went to over 3 different states to talk to the source. You know, you hear the Democrats, it's really dangerous talking about what they want to do to this country. And everything's free, and they put a shiny face on it. It's not free. We'll lose our freedom. And so our first series, you can watch all the clips and the documentary series at victimsofsocialism.org. But the first one highlights real survivors who fled Venezuela, have come to America for our precious freedom. And they said, you know, people warned us. We didn't listen. We didn't think it could happen. We thought, you know, it was fine. And look what happened to Venezuela, one of the richest nations on the earth when you look at their oil reserves. This was a country that was the most prosperous in that region. And Hugo Chavez brought in socialism, and then, of course, Nicolas Maduro, his successor. It is absolutely horrific what's going on. You have people starving, the economy with inflation, hyperinflation, people can't buy anything. It is an absolute disaster, violence, people in prison for their political beliefs, just for opposition. We have something that's so precious in our country, which is our freedoms that were granted by God, and endowed in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. And every single day on the campaign trail, the Democrats are talking about tearing it down. They're talking about throwing out the Bill of Rights. They're talking about no free speech. They're talking about no tax-exempt status for churches. They're talking about no Second Amendment, confiscating guns. It's so extreme, and we thought it was just so important to show that, you know, not from us, from people who know it up close and personal, what a terrible disaster this dangerous ideology is. So I encourage everyone to go to victimsofsocialism.org and check it out. We're going to be continuing to release more because it's not just Venezuela. It has failed everywhere it's tried, and we're going to be exposing that harsh reality.
Yeah, our previous guest, Paul Boutin, who had published this book about that Vladimir Bukovsky wrote, who happened to have been a dissenter, Soviet dissenter, who spent 12 years imprisoned and tortured by the Soviets. You know, reading a book like that and watching the videos that you are introducing to the public about the truth about socialism is so important. Our kids are coming out of school, going into higher levels of learning, completely brainwashed. How great it is if everyone is all on the same playing field. You know, you cannot be better than anyone else. You have to behave exactly like we tell you and how everyone else behaves. The independence and the freedom that we were based upon is disappearing. Let's just go along and get along. Let's just do the touchy-feely, open space. Everything is free until we have to pay for it. You know, it's crazy.
And it's an ideology as old as time, and it's never going to go away, but we have to constantly be pushing back against it. Freedom can be lost in just one generation. And so when you see them mainstreaming these dangerous ideas that have been on the fringe for decades and that have come to the forefront with Bernie Sanders revolutionizing his party, it is scary. It's dangerous stuff, and we have to be on the forefront. We have to be talking about it. We have to be talking about history because we have the evidence, we have the facts, we have the real-life stories to tell. It's not, Elizabeth Warren isn't the right socialist that, her plans will get it to work this time. No, it will be a disaster. It'll destroy our economy, but more importantly, it'll destroy our individual freedom, which is so precious.
And as you said, it's only one generation, and I think we're looking at that generation now. America has to rise up on 2020 and vote the right people. And right is in capital letters with quotation marks on either side of it, the right people into office.
Yeah, we have to take back the House and just continue, because we're showing such a good contrast when you look at the accomplishments President Trump has done and been able to do. We have more to do. We have more prosperity, peace, and strength to make America so strong again. But we need to get reelected, and we need to retake the House to really get some more great, long-lasting changes. And when you think what one of the most important things he's been able to do is all the federal judges throughout this bench. It's just over 150, two to the Supreme Court, of course. It's so important because we have to uphold our Constitution, because these Democrats are talking about throwing it all out and tearing it all down.
You know, I have to laugh. Though.
Liz.
Oh, all right, go ahead, Curtis.
No, I was just going to say, Trump was in Chicago, Illinois recently. Do we have any feedback on the impact his visit made when he was there, especially since he called them out on so many things?
It was incredible to see that audience with the police. This has been such an amazing, relationship that this president has had. He has such respect for law enforcement, and they feel the same way. They finally have a champion again in the White House, and he called him out. You're absolutely right. I love that this president is not afraid to tell it like it is, not afraid to call out failures of these far-left Democrat one-party-run cities. I mean, Democrats have been controlling Chicago for decades, and they're failing their citizens. Look at California. Look at this disaster, what's going on with their energy and electricity with the fires, because they won't clear the brush. I mean, because of all their rules and regulations. It is scary what the Democrats put in place when you have one-party rule. It is so unhealthy, and that's what Democrats are calling for on the national level. When you see it, so I'm just so proud that President Trump is not afraid to show the contrast, not afraid to go and take the message wherever we'll find it. And I can tell you what, our polling is showing really amazing progress when you look at different constituencies, people that have voted for Democrats for a long time and really feel abandoned by their party, and they're coming over to our side. So we're very optimistic. Because we want everyone to succeed. We want everyone to have safe neighborhoods, good-paying jobs, safe communities. And you look at what the Democrats are offering. Look no further than some of these cities, and that's what they would do on a national scale.
Well, Liz, thank you for joining with us today, and we'll be talking again. I know we've got a long way to go before the 2020 election, so you're definitely going to be back quite often. Liz Harrington, spokesperson for the National GOP. Liz, thank you, and God bless you for the hard work you do.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care.
Take care.
Check it out at GOP.com. Bring on our next guest, Michael LaPierre, who is running for the Senate seat that Lindsey Graham currently holds. So welcome aboard, Michael. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, it is our pleasure. And you're going to be down at our Tea Party meeting later on this month. Get your name and word out there, because I've gone nose to nose, literally nose to nose, toe to toe with Lindsey Graham here in Beaufort. So I know what you're up against.
Yeah, well, it's an uphill battle, and like you, I've gone toe to toe with Lindsey Graham in Washington D.C. and So I'm familiar with who he is, and I'm familiar, really, let's call it what it is, 4-year Democrat and a 2-year quasi-Republican. That's what I believe Lindsey Graham represents in full.
Well, my co-host knows I'll go on a rant with Lindsey. He changes his colors depending upon which way the wind is blowing. He was the one who, with John McCain, told Egypt that you must let the Muslim Brotherhood out of prison and allow them to participate in government. He is the one that sat down at the White House when Obama was president, broke bread in our house with the Muslim Brotherhood in attendance. Lindsey Graham is not the Republican everyone thinks he is. He'll change his stripes, as I said, whichever way the wind blows, whichever way he feels is going to get him reelected. And you notice the closer he gets to Election Day, the more he sounds like a conservative until he gets reelected and sworn back into office. That is back to old Lindsey again.
Oh, you are right on point. And so Senator Graham, again, is a professional political operative. That is his world. He sees everything in terms of the political winds. So he has, in terms of having a conscience about driving your anchor deep into the ground and saying, here's what I represent, here's my beliefs. Because he's a political operative, he doesn't do that. He just oscillates like an oscillating fan back and forth. And, you know, I learned something. I got my MBA 4 years ago, a little bit later in life. And what I learned a lot about brand building. And brand building is taking 3 or 4 key things that you represent and really building an entire organization around it. You drive your stake or your anchor deep into the ground and say, here is what I represent. My campaign has done that. If you go to LaPierreForSenate.com, you will see an anchor driven deep, unlike Senator Lindsey Graham, who I guess we'll call him Flimsy Grahamnesty.
I call him Lamesy Grahamnesty. So I think that was better. And I have for years. I'm sort of like persona non grata in his staff. They'll take my phone call, but they'll take everything I say and throw it in the trash can. I was looking at your platform on your webpage, and there's a lot that I like about it. But I do have one thing I want to question you about, because we have people on both sides of the aisles that go hot and cold on whether or not Trump is doing the right thing with these tariffs he's imposed. And I'm like, well, yeah, but if you look historically, that when we did have tariffs imposed, jobs and companies came back to the United States to avoid those tariffs. We employed more people and the economy started rolling better when we did. And we're actually the only nation in the world that does not impose the tariffs on the end product. We tariff on the first sale. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, yes, I am. And regardless, what's going to happen is the consumer ultimately is going to eat that. So here's how I look at it. The 4 largest trading partners with South Carolina are Germany, of course, China, then you've got Canada and Mexico. And so what I'm concerned about when you start to go down the path of 20, let's say, for instance, 25% tariffs, I am really, really concerned that it's going to impact the people of South Carolina. I want to protect our state. I certainly want to raise the level. As the tide rises, we want to lift all boats. But in this particular case, I'm with Tim Scott and all of the other Republican contingent from South Carolina who went to President Trump in the White House and said, President Trump, we are concerned for South Carolina. And if you remember, Senator Scott used the term Russian roulette with the South Carolina economy. So I am real concerned that those terrorists could do great harm to our state, but willing to listen to alternative ideas and alternative strategies to make sure South Carolina stays competitive economically, because those 4 countries are vital trading partners with us: China, Germany, Canada, and Mexico.
Well, I'm going to stand by Trump on this one for the tariffs with China, mainly because when I mention that it's on the first sale, you're talking about whatever little widget or wiring or component that may go into a refrigerator. It's that little first item that it's going to be taxed to 25%. So if that item is manufactured by China for, say, $5, you're only putting 25% on that one item, not the end product where you're paying $900 at 25% tariff. It's just that one component inside it.
That's right.
And the cost is so negligible that most companies that do face, paying the tariff don't even pass it on to the consumer because it's not worth it for them to raise the price and lose the sale. They'll rather eat that 0.25%. Now, it's working with China mainly because they do have their fingers in so many pies within our country, but also any money that is earned in China must stay within control of the Communist Party that controls the banks. It cannot leave. So you make an investment in manufacturing in China, you can't take that money out. That is our tax dollars, our consumer spending going into China and never returning back home, only propping up the Communist Party. When we impose those tariffs, we weaken the Communist Party. We encourage them to release our intellectual property and release those funds back to us. That's why I support him in this.
Yeah, and you make some excellent points, and certainly we want what is in the best interest of America. America first, and we've just got to be really, really cautious. And I think the whole potential trade wars with our allies and even some of our frenemies, if you want to call it, are being closely watched by the market and Wall Street, and they get real jittery when this whole trade war situation goes in the wrong direction, and the markets take a free fall. So we're just going to be very measured and make sure that it's good for good for the United States, but it's also good for South Carolina.
Well, that I will agree with. Now, I want to change the tack a little bit because every time there's a shooting, everyone goes into a huge panic. Oh, we've got to have more gun control. We have to take care of mental illness. We need these red flag laws. And that is such a slippery slope. Where do you stand on red flag laws?
Oh, yeah, great question. And I'm going to call it the red flag con. Because I think it's nothing more than a backdoor attempt to further infringe our Second Amendment rights. I think it infringes our Fifth Amendment rights and our 14th Amendment rights, the due process rights. They've even got real creative in the way that they're trying to sell this. They use fancy language like accelerated due process. Well, I'm sorry, but if family member can squeal on family member, or ex-wife against husband, or husband against ex-wife, do the reverse. If that starts, we go down that slippery path, then all of a sudden they take the guns first and then go to court. That is not due process. So I am with you. That is very, very dangerous, and we've got to continue to put the pressure on Graham, because I think if you've seen over the last 4 or 5 months, or however long it's been since those horrific shootings, Graham is starting to take steps back, because I think people like you and me and people across America are saying, hey, leave our guns alone. And I believe that is a bad policy. And I've read the Rubio policy in full many, many times, and I do not like it one bit.
Well, that's the problem, because they're already doing that. You've got various states that have instituted these red flag laws, and all someone gets is a knock on the door. Here's your warrant to take your weapons, without even knowing that there's a problem out there. They get hit unawares.
That's right.
So many times, and they started with the veterans, and we've talked about that on the show when it was happening, saying they're going to start with the veterans. Next step is the general public, and I proved to be true, exactly true on that.
Yeah.
So you get a little note in your file from some clerk or some psychiatrist you've never even met before, and next thing you know, your guns are confiscated.
That's right. I'm with you. I was talking to a sheriff just the other day, and he says, hey, all we need to do is enforce the laws on our books. We don't need new laws and new regulation. And that goes really hand in hand with Lindsey Graham. He's very good at wanting to add layers of taxation, layers of bureaucracy. We don't need that. Let's enforce the laws on our books. If somebody, is going to do harm to others and they're making that known and they're brandishing a gun or even not, I mean, there are ways to handle that now. Police officers, they are very, very good at what they do, and we don't need more regulation. That is just not a good thing for our country or our state.
Well, I have to say, because as a New York City cop, I've never taken a legal weapon off an individual. It's always been an illegal weapon. And you're right. We've got the laws in place. When we had the shooting in Charleston, the laws were not followed. And if you look at shooting after shooting, somewhere along the way, the law was skirted. Whether someone did not follow through in whatever process was necessary, or someone did not report something that was necessary, the law every single time has not been followed.
Great point. And it's just so true that the bad guys are going to find a way to get the guns illegally. We start taking our guns away from the good guys, we're going down the wrong way. If you look at the laws on the books in the various states when it comes to concealed carry, open carry, and even those states that have no permit, they are some of the safest states in our country, and that's a fact. So I think we need more guns, not less guns, to protect ourselves and our families, because that's what this is all about. We need to be able to protect our families and protect from foreign invasion if that day ever comes. We must always remember that guns are foundational to who we are as Americans. That is the right. That is our Second Amendment right, and we should never forget that.
It's funny because I've told this story many times here that I was home alone one day, and this guy kept on knocking on the door, and my little spidey sense went up. Turns out it was a group of guys that were going around the neighborhood to see who was home and who could be burglarized. And if you opened the door, they were looking past you to see what you had inside. So the second time he knocked on my door, I tucked my little .38 in my waistband. I opened the door, and I said, "I'm giving you to the count of 10. And it was feet don't fail me now. And you can park literally 8 cars in my driveway. Feet don't fail me now. It turned out it was a group that was burglarizing. I made the 911 call, gave them the description, and a week later, they had the whole gang. So guns deter crime and violence.
Wow, that's a great story. I have a family member who had a similar story in a neighborhood. There was word around that there was some vandalism and some breaking and entering and some all that kind of stuff going on, and she got a knock on the door, and she just showed her rifle, and all of a sudden the guy sprinted away. So if you look at the facts on how many lives are saved because of the guns and how many violent crimes are avoided because of there's no comparison, but the progressive left always wants to focus on the mass shootings, where in the no gun zones, right, where a lot of this stuff takes place, and I'm as compassionate as the next person about when that happens. My heart goes out to these families, but that is not. Look at the totality. Over 1 million violent crimes are avoided because of people that have protection. And we never focus on that, do we? We always want to focus on what's bad and the horrific mass shootings, but it's just such a small percentage of what's going on that people don't want to talk about the good stuff.
Unfortunately, there's no statistics to say how many crimes were prevented because someone was armed and forewarned. There's no statistic for that. You can't find it anywhere. And trust me, I've tried looking. Go ahead, Curtis.
Yeah. Yeah, we just recently took out the number 1 and number 2 leaders in ISIS. And as always, the Democrats try to downplay this. But the thing is, when you look and compare this to the Obama administration when they took out Osama bin Laden, why is it that the left is always praising their own and putting our leaders down on our side. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my thoughts are pretty direct. The media, the mainstream media, is an arm of the progressive left, the Democratic Socialist Party, and that's just the way it is today. And so the right will never get any credit for anything, quite frankly, especially during a presidential year, right, an election year. They're just not going to get any credit. Our president did a wonderful thing. He put down dogs that were hurting us, that want to kill us, that want to do harm to our allies. And we always have to protect ourselves. So congratulations, President Trump, on a masterful job. 2 separate operations, one that got Baghdadi, and then the other one that got his mouthpiece. So they must be scrambling right now over there to figure out what they're going to do, because no doubt the next one that comes up in order of seniority, we are going to be looking for him as well. So I'm so grateful of what President Trump has just done.
We are too. You know, I had thought up a very funny joke, but I don't know if I want to tell it. Well, maybe I will. What was the last thought on the mind of that dog when he bit al-Baghdadi in the butt? Pork? I'm so bad. I am so bad.
And it's bad, but I'm just, it's just a terrible thing that we had to get to that point. But that's the world that we live in. We've got to fight terrorism around the globe where it's going to do harm to America or to our close allies. We've always got to be there to support our allies. And I'm not saying we need to be the world's police. However, we've got to figure out what is in our strategic best interest, our national best interest, and protect our allies as well. So they're always difficult calls, and I guess that's why the president is the president. He gets to make those tough calls.
Well, what really gets me is everyone was criticizing him for pulling troops out of Syria. First off, it is up to Congress to declare war and military action. The president can only do that on a temporary basis, and he overstayed with these troops in place. In other words, he was actually violating his duties by allowing them to remain. So if Congress had any intestinal fortitude, they would have passed whatever was necessary to declare whatever action necessary in Syria. But you've got a bunch of cowards in there not willing to do their job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's just a lame duck Congress. It's election year. They're not going to do anything that would give our president any sort or sign of a victory. So therefore, there will be nothing passed. Now, what you will see, and we have seen, is that many of the House members are putting together legislation that is like over the top, progressive left, ridiculous, and they know that as soon as that gets to the Senate, it will be dead on arrival. So there's just a lot of showmanship going on right now. Maybe it's that some of them are up for re-election, but a lot of the bills, quite frankly, that are going through the House, especially on the Democratic side or the Democrat side, they're garbage bills. It's just for show, we are unfortunately, and I guess I'll turn gears just a little bit. There were 4 appropriations bills. We're trying to pass a budget, and I was pleasantly surprised that 4 out of the 12 appropriations bills were passed. They got 8 more to go in a very short period of time, but I guess we need to claim a little victory so far with a long way to go on those bills.
I'm going to switch tack just a little bit because we've had our government now define marriage. And as soon as that came through, when SCOTUS came down with their ruling on defining marriage, I said they violated the Constitution by defining what is known as a religious right. We have in every single state, in every single municipality, a definition of a domestic union. It is a contract you sign when you get that license and you go before a justice of the peace or a religious official and say your vows. Every state has a definition of that civil domestic union. So why has our government decided to violate the Constitution by defining what is a religious right, thus therefore placing government in charge of our religion?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I'm going to take you to the Bible. If you look at, I believe it's Psalms 2:1, it talks about the types of leaders and the types of government that we're going to have the further we get away from the time of Christ. And the rulers and the kings will make laws that really go against the moral law of God. And I think in this case I think in Roe v. Wade, we have in taking prayer out of public schools, because our government, if you think about it this way, years ago, our government and our church were driven. Right in the middle of the two was faith and the Word of God. And so we've moved greatly to a European model. We've taken the Bible and put it on the shelf. Now, it's still driving the ecclesiastical side, still driving church leadership. The Bible's still driving local churches, right? But on the governmental side, where the Bible was still impacting the government years ago, impacting thought, worldview. Now we've moved to a secular humanist or a secularist view of our government, and that's following Europe. And I'm not having any part of that. We need to put, the Word of God and faith right back in the middle of our government and continue to drive our churches, because without morality, and all of the founders knew this, Washington, Adams, Madison, Franklin, they all in some way said the same thing, that without virtue, without religion, our country will go downhill. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing an anti-God, secularist society driving our government. And my campaign, LaPierreCandidate.com, I'm a conservative Republican, and I am going to stand up and fight to put and rebuild the moral and the spiritual foundations of our great country.
It's gotten so bad that one of my Tea Party members told a story where she had to go to court for whatever reason, and only to find out that the case had been dismissed against her. And she said, "Oh, thank God." And the judge reprimanded her for saying that. And I'm sorry, the last time I read the Constitution, it said Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. You've got kids being reprimanded for praying over their meal before they sit down to lunch. You have them reprimanded should they wear a crucifix or a yarmulke or carry a Bible to school. We have gone so far beyond what the original intent was of our Constitution that I don't even know if we can bring ourselves back. Can we?
I think we can, and I do, because our job is to redeem the time. As Christians, as people of faith, regardless of your faith, we need to do everything we can to be salt and light in this world. And as light, we want to be that shining, that luminescence that really just gives the light in the direction for the way that where you want your state, where we want our country to go. But at the same time, the salt is a preserving agent, as you know. We want to preserve and take out the contaminants, if you will, of our society. And so I think we can. We've just got to get back and have people elected to Congress that have the depth of spiritual insight to know where we need to go. And so when I'm in the Senate, I'm going to look at every piece of legislation in a much different worldview. I'm not a professional political operative like Lindsey Graham. He thinks of the political wins. I'm going to think, how does this improve society? How does it repair our moral and spiritual foundations? And I'll tell you what, when you put that kind of a worldview on and think in that way, you can change the world.
That we can. Another subject I want to touch upon is that now government has been slicing out protected classes. We have now the Equality Act, which is a farce. You have people pressing for civil rights for a section of our society greater than any other individual. But I'm sorry, I thought Article 9 of the Constitution protected all people from being treated unequally.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. I'm with you. So here's the deal. What you're seeing is a play out of the Marxist-Leninist playbook. What they're trying to do is destabilize our country, and the best. And it's a strategy, right? You pit one victim, quote unquote, against another, right? And you're really trying to create anarchy in a sense where everyone's a victim and they hate the government, and that is just not good for America. So we've got to call it what it is. It's Marxist-Leninist. It's a democratic socialist trying to destabilize our country. Now on that ladder, and let's call it the destabilization ladder. There are 5 rungs, in my opinion. The first rung is, well, let's just call it liberalism. They play in the sandbox of the United States, and that sandbox is fair. I mean, still within the legal boundaries, and it's still within our democratic republic ideals, our constitutional ideals. But the second rung on that ladder, it's progressivism, right? And that's getting a little more over the top, a little more Marxist-Leninist oriented, where all of a sudden now they're starting to change the rules. We're going to try to change the culture, change the language, change history, what history is all about. And they start to manipulate things, and they start to use coercion and force, not to a real bad extent, but still they're on the second rung. Well, here comes the third rung of that ladder, and that's where we are today, when a self-proclaimed socialist can vie for the Democratic nomination. That's where we are. And now you look at our college campuses, you look at our schools, they're all about safe spaces, and they don't want to hear anything that detracts from their liberal ideals, the progressive liberal ideals. So that's the third rung. And then you get to the fourth rung, which is Marxist-Leninism. Karl Marx said that he did not think that people could reason. The human race cannot reason, and that's in his writings. So how do you fix that? You use brute force. That's the fourth rung. And then lastly, of course, we've got the totalitarian. The fifth rung is ultimate control of everything that we do. So we're at that third rung. It's a tipping point in America, and we've got to re-elect Donald Trump, because I cannot imagine what it will be like with a democratic socialist at the helm of this country.
No, it's part of it. What I blame is going to be on the education system, because it seeped into our society starting in the late 50s all the way on up. And when I was living in New York, just before we moved here to South Carolina, Hillary Clinton was running for Senate. And she got up on whatever speech she was doing, and she says, "And I am a progressive." And I looked at my husband and I said, the slippery slope is sliding now. Because once she said that, everyone else came out of the closet showing their true colors. We ended up with a communist delegation in the House of Representatives openly signing their names as a communist, still running under the Democratic ticket. And I said, she opened the floodgates, and boy, did I prove to be completely true. How do we close the floodgates? How do we teach our kids what our founding really means?
Oh yeah, that's a great point. This whole education thing. So there was a person, and I'm going to use this example to answer your question. Back in the days of Reagan, there was this lady. Her name was Jean Kirkpatrick, and Jean Kirkpatrick was just a wonderful a deep thinker on conservative issues, and she was the first woman to the United Nations as an ambassador, and she held at the same time a cabinet post under Reagan. Well, it just so happens that she was a lifelong Democrat, but yet she was so conservative that Reagan took her into his cabinet, and she called progressivism. And you can read her book. She says it right there in her book. Progressivism is a plague on the Democratic Party. Her own party, she says it is a plague. And so I think we can learn a lot from someone that was a lifelong Democrat, a Reagan cabinet appointee, an ambassador to the United Nations that says progressivism is a plague.
Oh, that it is.
Michael.
Go ahead, Curtis.
Yes, sir.
As a senator, what bill would you sponsor that would lead us towards reclaiming our school system?
Yeah, we've got to continue to drive school choice at the state level, but at the federal level, I would propose that over a 10-year period that we start to disband the Department of Education. We need to right-size the Department of Education and push it back to the states. Remember, it's we the people. I'm not interested in big government. Big government has never done anything of any value in my estimation. I think that outside of our military, I think the Department of Education is just overwhelming. It's sprawling. It's trying to indoctrinate our children as a form of an automaton where everyone thinks the same way. And I'm saying we need a panoramic view in our public schools of education, not only Christian education, but all types of history, right? That's what we want to do. We want to broaden their experiences. But so as we, over the 10-year period, draw down the Department of Education, what I would do is I would leave a standing, just a small group, 2 representatives from each state that would act as more of a, not a decision-making body for education, but one that would share best practices relating to school choice. I think school choice drives a quality and a superior education. That's where we need to go. When moms and dads, we the people, when moms and dads can say, I want to do this or this or this for my child, I want to put them here or here, that's how we can change. So I would sponsor legislation to get the Department of Education right-sized where they do not have decision-making ability, but we push that back to the states. That's how I would do it.
Yeah, I never understood why our tax dollars have to go up to through our government up to the federal government to go back to our schools in an unequal basis. If I send $25 million from Beaufort County up to the federal government to help us with our education, I want that same $25 million back. But that's not what's happening. It's completely lopsided.
Oh, yeah. Really, it's funny money. I mean, they tax the daylights out of us, and most of it's for education, and much of that, as you just said, you pointed out, it goes to the feds, and where does it go then? You know, it's just part of big bureaucracy. The DOE is just one of those bureaucratic institutions that we need to chisel down and get it to the point where it's helping, you know, it's an advisory, it's not a decision-making body, it's an advisory body to the states. And I think we can do that. If we get it down to 100 individuals from the monstrosity that it is now, I think we can make some really, really good progress and let the parents decide. Let the parents decide what's good for their children. Now, I don't want some bureaucrat telling me what was good for my children or my grandchildren.
Well, they tell us what type of light bulbs to buy, what type of toilets to install in the house. Why not let them take over all the rest of our everyday lives? Police. I got into a debate earlier today on LinkedIn, And you'd think you'd get a serious debate going on in LinkedIn. It's not the same as in Facebook or Twitter. And
right.
A friend of mine was proposing that the federal government control or outlaw these e-cigarettes, these Juuls. And I'm like, wait a minute. How much do you want government regulation to control you? Let the consumer decide. Let, community outreach and education show the pros and cons of it. But who are you to tell me how I live my life? Which is what they're doing to us now, aren't they?
Oh, it's every facet. It's over-regulation. It's become, and it's an overused term that you've heard before, we've become a nanny state. They just watch over every aspect of our lives, and it's really silly. Yeah, on the e-cigarette thing, I'm not in a position, and nor would I ever, as a senator, want to say that adults can't do this or can't do that. That's not my role. What I will say is I will do everything I can to protect children and those that let's say can't help themselves. So and that's a group of our constituency that we've got to be, in my opinion, we've got to be very, very mindful of with this whole e-cigarette thing. We can't let that get out of control. So yeah, but when you move, when you're an adult, this is America. We make choices. Some of those choices are not good choices. So I would really, really focus in on protecting our children and those that can't help themselves as far as this whole e-cigarette thing is.
Yeah, well, we see prohibition does not work. We instituted it with the 18th Amendment, and then years later you had to pull it back with the 21st. So prohibition does not work. Personal responsibility works. I mean, we know alcohol will damage the liver, and people die from cirrhosis of the liver every single day. But if that person decides to go to the store, make that purchase, and guzzle down that bottle in one sitting, that's their personal choice, and they're responsible for any consequences.
You're so right, and that takes us almost full circle where we started the conversation about rebuilding the moral and spiritual foundation. So it's the individual citizens within our country and then within South Carolina. They've got to determine that they want to do the right thing. There has to be virtue in our government and among our citizens. That has to drive them. And I think the more that we talk about that, as a senator, I'll have a bully pulpit. I'll be able to time and time again talk about being in church, whatever your faith is, and driving that aspect of our government. And that's something that you haven't heard from Lindsey Graham at all. That's just not something that he is comfortable with. So when you have a leader in the Senate that will drive that message, I just know that God will bless that and hearts will be changed because God's word will never return void. It will have an impact. So I believe that we can do some incredible things if we change the way that we think about government and we change the talking points. I mean, and I'll give you an example. I go to I've heard Lindsey speak 3 or 4 times, and I hear the same message. I hear about the family pool hall. I hear about the family liquor store, and then I hear about the family, liquor, the other liquor shop thing that he talks about. And then he says a few cuss words, talks about playing golf with Donald Trump, and then he walks off. And I'm thinking, wow, is that the kind of statesman that I want as a United States Senator? And I'm repelled and repulsed by his secular approach. I mean, there has to be a spiritual element in the leadership of our state, and that's what I'm trying to do is change that, turn that corner for us, bring us back. And it's almost, if I could say it this way, it's almost a recommissioning of where we were 150, 200 years ago. This is nothing new. We've gone off the rails in many respects, and now we just need to turn the corner back to the traditional and the family values. Everyone can relate to that, can't they? I mean, it's not black, white, brown. Yeah, it doesn't matter. When you talk family values, when you talk traditional family values, people, they get that. Even those that maybe not be of faith, they may not have faith, but they're moralists. I think that message resonates with people, and that's the message for the team LaPierre for Christ. It's about morality. It's about rebuilding the moral and spiritual foundation. So we're really excited, as you could probably tell.
Oh, absolutely. At one point in time in our history, the church was the center of our neighborhood. It was our home. Everyone felt comfortable. Most of our American Revolution would not have occurred without the assistance of the black-robed regiment, starting to preach revolution in the pulpit, stepping down from the pulpit, and some of them serving side by side in the Revolutionary War battles. And now today, heaven forbid, a minister, a rabbi, whatever, says anything the least bit political in the pulpit, someone's going to run to the IRS and say, oh, they're talking politics. It's supposed to be separation of church and state. I'm wondering how many ministers would risk their congregation by preaching politics from the pulpit for what is morally right and risk the ire of the IRS, which is unconstitutional to begin with.
That's right. Yeah, and so I wrote a book just recently. It's called A Covenant. Responsible Citizenship and Godly Conversation. That's the subtitle. And I talk about that exact issue, that the pastors, and I call them pastor leaders, because that's what they are. The pastor leaders across our state and our country, and I'm going to use a broad brush, but in many respects, they have abdicated their role as leaders because they are afraid of the Johnson Amendment. They are afraid that their tax-exempt status is going to be withheld. And what I'm saying is stand up and lead. They're afraid because it's about losing people. Secondarily, first, of course, it's the tax-exempt status, but then they're afraid they're going to lose people if they talk politics or talk policy issues from the pulpit. And then thirdly, they're afraid because they've been so indoctrinated that they think it's wrong to talk about policy and from the pulpit. And I've got an attorney on retainer that's argued in front of the Supreme Court, and he said, Michael, he said, and he's a religious, he just protects religious liberty. That's what he does. He says pastors can get up in the pulpit and they can say anything they want, except they not advocating for a particular candidate and not denigrating a particular candidate. He said, other than that, any issue, they can talk about any issue from the pulpit and not fear. And then he said one thing I thought was real cute. He said, and guess how many people have lost their tax-exempt status? And then I knew the answer. It was none, zero. So we've been indoctrinated and really feared into not saying anything from the pulpit. And in my book, A Covenant, I'm saying, pastors, please stand up and lead like the pastors of yesteryear. Because believe you me, years ago, the pastors got up and they let their congregation know exactly what they felt on all of the issues that today, we would say are politically incorrect. That wasn't the case years ago. So pastors need to get back on the horse and lead their congregations.
All right. There's so much more to go over with you. We only got about 10 minutes left with you before my next guest calls in. But every time I go to the doctor, I'm saddled with regulations left over from Obamacare. And I just recently had my annual physical, and questions that's required by the federal government before you submit your claim to Medicare is like, what's my sex life like? Am I depressed? Have I ever felt depressed? Am I suicidal? I mean, I'm going there for a splinter in my finger. What does my sex life have to do with a splinter in my finger?
Oh, that's hilarious. It's back to what we were talking about. The government, the Obama year, that whole plan. It was all about big government, and it's all about Big Brother taking care of you from birth till death, and they want you to rely on them. So the more information that they can gather on you in their world, the better. For me, healthcare, we've got to work overtime in trying to privatize healthcare. Good free market competition in the healthcare industry is where we need to go, and we got to get the government out of healthcare. We got to work hard at just creating the competitiveness that we have in a free market capitalist society, and I think President Trump is doing a good job. We're starting to work hard on prescription drugs. We're starting to make some inroads in making the cost visible to people, patients, when they go to the doctor. And so he's starting to do some things that I like, but we can do so much more. But we can't go back to the Obama year where it's a single payer system, or that's where at least they were headed. We've just got to stay away from that. That's bad for America, and that's just another nail in the coffin of towards that democratic socialist worldview that I am appalled by, and I will fight every step of the way.
Well, Ted Yoho had sponsored legislation earlier this year. It's called H.R. 856. It's the Physician Pro Bono Care Act of 2019, whereas the premise is if you have someone that is a Medicaid eligible individual, rather than having the government pay for the doctor visit, the doctor does the work pro bono, the same way an attorney would do pro bono. And when it comes time for him to file his income tax, he can take the cost that would have been charged Medicare to the government and take it off his income tax. So it reduces his tax burden as a small business owner, and it will decrease the amount of people reliant on government paying for their health care, and it's a win-win situation. Would this be something you would be looking forward to?
You know, I would study that bill. On the surface, I would think it is appealing, and we would have to, take a look, do a little bit deeper dive, on, whether or not that makes sense for everybody. But at least first blush, I would say, I really am intrigued and would want to see, if there's any other considerations. Let me put it that way, because sometimes when you dig deep into a policy issue, there are some other considerations that people, oh yeah, I forgot about that. But so I would say, yeah, I'm optimistic on what you just described, but I would want to see the full detail and how. It's like doing due diligence, right? You don't want to be surprised. It's the law of unintended consequences. Yeah. So I'd want to study the whole bill and then the overall ramifications before I said yes.
Okay, that's a fair answer. There's so much more. Like I said, I've got about 20 some odd different things I wrote down last night to talk to you about. We had mentioned the IRS earlier, and there's so many of us that would love to see the IRS fully disbanded. Would you be willing to work with individuals that are supportive of a fair tax type of plan?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I believe that the IRS is not a worthy or a productive organization. We have... what's the tax code now? Up to 76,000 pages, and I think they have like 78,000 employees. So it's almost like a full page of red tape for every employee. Total nonsense. That you talk about major bureaucratic bloat. There it is. It's the IRS. So yeah, we need a system, a fair tax, flat tax, something that. It's simple, something that we can do as Senator Cruz, and I'm with him on this, that we can do on the back of a postcard, and then just really take down the IRS over time. So I am 100% for that, I would love to work with my colleagues in the Senate to come up with some kind of a flat tax, fair tax that would satisfy that. Would just really implode the IRS.
I would love to see that, because what I loved about it, because I've got the original, I got a first edition of the Fair Tax book signed by both authors, and I've read it twice already. But what I love is it allows me to decide how much money I'm going to give the government in my tax. If I want to go out and get a new TV, do I want to give 10% or 25% of $2,000, or am I going to go with a more economical TV? And instead of 25% of 2,000, 25% of 200. I make that decision when I make my purchase. That's what I love about it.
Yeah, I do too. And it doesn't matter the income, right? I mean, poor, middle class, it doesn't matter. It's just certainly there. And if the fair tax that I'm thinking that you're describing, there's probably a certain level where below there's no tax. But then above a certain amount, there's a tax where it's just like a consumption tax. So it makes a lot of sense to me, and we've got to do something, because right now, again, 76,000-page tax law, that is absolutely nonsense, and so we've got to simplify it. And when you simplify it, you become much more efficient in the way it's administered, and then you become much more efficient in terms of the overall cost. We can right size our government. It's just a matter: do we have the political will to do what you just described? We have to have people in Congress that have the political will, that believe in term limits. Because when you believe in term limits, you're there as a public servant. You're not there as a politician. And I think you can make much more headway. For me, as a businessman going to the Senate, term limiting myself, I think I can make some bold decisions that will get our country back on track.
Yeah, you also have on your website other ideas, too, in what you do with that seat when you get up there. And one of the things we see with a lot of these senators and congressmen, they go up there, they're earning just the regular salary, They don't have millions in the bank, but when they leave, they have a cushy pension plan. They've got a cushy health care plan that is separate from the average citizen, again, in violation of the Constitution. You're not going to do any of that.
No, and thank you for bringing that up. So I live a middle-class lifestyle, not wealthy. I'm middle class, and I really like my middle-class lifestyle. I was privileged to have a lot of cool experiences in my life. I went to an Ivy League school. I ended up playing in the Washington Nationals organization, professional baseball. And back then, if they were called the Montreal Expos years and years ago.
Okay.
And got an MBA. Got an MBA at Clemson. And so I've really had a cool life. But I've always been middle class, and I'm glad. I'm happy. I'm just happy with that. So when I'm a senator, am I doing this for for monetary reasons? No. And what I've said in my pledge to South Carolina is I'm going to donate a majority of my salary to charity. And I want other senators to think about doing that exact thing. Bite the bullet and don't go to Congress and try to gain monetarily or try to gain prestige. And that's all nonsense. That's not a public servant. Public servants do not want that. They just want to serve. So the money does not drive me. The notoriety does not drive me. I just simply want to serve the state of South Carolina. And I'm going to donate a majority of the salary. And if the Senate rules allow the Cadillac medical plan that they get, I want to opt out of that. And I want to keep my middle class share plan. I have a Christian share plan that I use that I just love. So thank you for bringing that up. It's a whole different way of looking at the position of senator. In my pledge to South Carolina, I said I wanted to redefine what it meant to be a United States senator. And if anyone goes and reads it, they will clearly see I mean what I say.
Your website is LaPierreforsenate.com, LAPIE LaPierre for FORSenate.com. I'm wishing you good luck, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in a couple of weeks. You'll be here in about 3 weeks visiting our group, and I'm really looking forward to shaking your hand. Someone finally has the intestinal fortitude to take on Lindsey Graham, or as I call him, Lindsey Grahamnesty, because as soon as he gets reelected, he's going to go back to his rhino ways. I'm telling you that, folks. Well, Michael, any closing thoughts before you leave us for the day?
Oh, it's just been a pleasure talking with you, and keep doing what you're doing. Keep exposing Senator Graham. By you peeling that onion back, your listening audience will really start to understand why we need to go in an entirely new direction, and I hope that your listening audience will spread the word. Spread the word that there is a viable alternative to Senator Graham, someone that has corporate experience. I was a vice president of sales at a Fortune 500 company, and I was a global strategist at a $65 billion company with a B. And so I have the background to take Lindsey Graham on and to go into that snake pit up in Washington and clearly make a difference. And so we need your listening audience to spread the good word.
Well, I'll make one observation, because every 2 years our state GOP has their convention. And 2 conventions ago, Lindsey Graham went to stand up to talk, and he got booed. This last convention, he stood up to talk because he's supporting Trump. They cheered him. The very same people that booed him 2 years prior cheered him on. I kind of just sat there very quietly with my hands on my lap when he got up on stage to talk. So he's not getting claps from me. Don't worry about
that. Well, he just did something. I've got I don't know if you have any time for me to bring this up, but I'll leave it here. He just recently put out a resolution in the Senate that condemned what Pelosi and Schiff are doing in terms of the impeachment scam going on right now. And, people don't realize he's trying to take credit for putting this resolution out. But, he's a day late and a dollar short. Any media relations expert will tell you that in order to control the narrative of a crisis or a major event, you have to be out front on the issue early on. And you've got to just dig in and hit it hard. Lindsey Graham, it took him 4 or 5 weeks to issue that resolution. And by him being so slow on the trigger, he has hurt our president in public opinion, right? In the court of public opinion, because he was so slow in issuing that resolution, he really has hurt our president. And yet he's trying to take credit. Now that he's finally come out with it, he's trying to take credit, and I think that's shameful.
That it is. Well, I want to thank you. Curtis, we got our next guest coming in on the line, so I want to thank Michael for joining us.
All right.
And I look forward to seeing you in about 3 weeks. Take care, Michael, and God bless you for the hard work
All
you
righty.
do. All right, take care.
Okay, blessings to you. Thank you.
All right. Check
Take
it out.
care.
LaPierreForSenate.com. Let's get Lindsey Grahamnesty out of office. Let's welcome our next guest. He has the intestinal fortitude to take on Adam Shifty Schiff. Let's welcome aboard Eric Early. Good afternoon, Eric. How are you today?
I'm great, Ann. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is our pleasure. And I'm glad that someone is finally getting out in front of Adam Schiff, because that guy's got to go. That guy has definitely
He's a bad dude. He is a bad, evil dude. He's got to go.
Well, when you were planning to run, were you aware of just how bad he was, or is it just that every single day when you get bombarded by him in the news, it finally hit you saying, I've got to do something?
No, I knew how bad this guy was. I've been like everybody else in the country. I would watch TV and see this guy Schiff get on TV during this Russia hoax and lie to each and every one of us for 2 straight years. I, and I'm sure many of your listeners and you knew from the get-go that Donald Trump had not colluded with Russians. So every time Schiff would come on TV and tell us that he had the evidence that clearly showed that the president colluded with Russians, I knew this guy was lying to me. And I wasn't happy about it. I don't like being lied to every single day of the week by a guy who acts like he's morally superior to all of us. So I got in the race in July, which was before the latest craziness, the whistleblower thing. But this is just more of the same from a guy that, even though I don't know him personally, I do not like him.
I'm just wondering why someone hasn't started a recall petition to get him out of there, because he has violated the Constitution in so many ways with these closed-door hearings.
Well, you know, the way you get rid of a congressman is to have him expelled from Congress. And unfortunately, the way a congressman gets expelled from Congress is where a majority of the people in Congress vote to expel him. And here we have a Congress, the majority being Democrats. They're not going to vote to expel him. As far as a recall, you know, I haven't looked into that. It sounds great, but something tells me that the recall would have to come out of the district that elected him, the district I'm running in. And given the various percentages that we're dealing with, which is very pro-Democrat in this district, again, I'd be surprised that they'd recall him, even though I think most Americans would want to recall him, and I think most Americans would want to expel him from the Congress. But unfortunately, I don't see that happening. So at this point, we've got to elect somebody to replace this guy, and I'm the guy to elect.
Yeah, well, you know, when I was following the elections that brought him into office, we came across a thing called vote harvesting. And I find that 17 states have some form of vote harvesting. The state I live in, I did not realize we have vote harvesting. And as soon as I realized it, I got a hold of my state senators and I got a hold of my state representative and I said, guys, are you aware of that? Fortunately, my state senator he proposed a bill to get rid of it. And my state representative is going to create a companion bill. So, you know, it's important that we reach out to our elected officials, and anything we have of concern, we should bring it forward to them. Sometimes getting content, though, is hard.
Yeah, I will tell you, in California, it's called ballot harvesting, and the Democrats have turned that into a fine art to wrest control of this state, and I say that facetiously. And what ballot harvesting is, for your listeners, is that people can go to any voter's door. Out here we have absentee balloting before the general election, and people can go and say, "Listen, if you haven't mailed in your absentee ballot yet, I'll be happy to take it and collect it and bring it to the polls for you." And what happened in the last election here, primarily in Orange County, California, was that tens of millions of dollars were brought in by outside Democrat forces to pay for this massive team of ballot harvesters to go door to door in heavily Democratic voter neighborhoods, and they were able to collect hundreds of thousands of these ballots. And so that's why on election night, most of the Congress people running for Congress in Orange County, the Republicans had won. And a few days later, after these absentee ballots were counted, they had all lost. And so it opens the door for huge voter fraud and vote abuse. And no one knows, for example, how many of these ballot harvesters go to somebody's home and actually help them fill out the ballot before they walk away with it. And the other thing is, I don't know any conservatives. I don't know any Republicans that would hand their ballot to somebody and say, "Sure, take this," and somebody they don't know, "Take this and bring it to." But out here, the other side of the aisle, they managed to get statewide about 800,000 ballots were harvested. It's a terrible law, and it's been absolutely abused out here to the detriment of the Republicans.
Yeah, what I found amazing is that these guys were being paid for how many they turned in. the more you turn in, the more
Yep.
money you're getting paid. So who's not going to, bust their butt going door to door or walking through an apartment building? Or they were getting homeless people off the street. Hey, sign this ballot. I'll fill it out,
Yep.
the rest of it for you. Or I'll tell you who's the good candidate. Here, you just check the box I'm telling you to check off. The fraud was just so rampant, but it's legal. It's a legal fraud.
Yeah, and just one of the ironies of this whole thing was in North Carolina in the last election cycle, I think there was a congressional race. You're not allowed to ballot harvest in North Carolina. There were about 400 or so, give or take, ballots that were harvested. A Republican won that congressional race by way more than 400 votes. But because there were these 400 or so that votes that were harvested, they threw out the results of that race, and there had to be a special election, and thankfully another Republican ended up winning that congressional seat. But, you have something like that in North Carolina where the Democrats were able to throw out the entire election result because of something like 400 ballots that were harvested. Meanwhile, in California, you have 800,000 that were harvested, and that's the law. You're allowed to do it. So, in this state, I'm sure many of your listeners know, we have a Democrat cabal running things here. We have a supermajority Democrats in the legislature. We've got an attorney general who I ran against in the last election, and his name is Javier Becerra, and I was able to get almost 1 million votes against the guy, which was pretty cool given that I'm a Republican, and it was the first election I ever ran in. And then we have this Governor Gavin Newsom, and these people put them all together. It's bad news. But I do believe at some point the worm is going to turn in this state because there are all kinds of bad things happening out here that the government should have made sure has not happened. So more and more people are starting to realize that what we have running the state and what we've had running the state for so long needs to be replaced. We need Republicans back in charge of the state, and we're going to have to build this state back up from the ground up. So, as you know, I'm running against Adam Schiff, and he is just a bad guy. He's a liar. He's a leaker. I call him a national disgrace. And now we have this entire whistleblower thing, which is an outrage. Anybody with common sense who reads the transcript of that phone call, you don't have to be a judge, you don't have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be anything. You just read it, and you know that there is no way a president should be impeached based on that phone call. And yet, Schiff and these others that he's working with, and of course the mainstream media, have turned that phone call as into, like the greatest crime that has ever been committed by a president in this country. It is an absolute joke. It's an outrage. It's not illegal what the president did. There's no comparison to what Bill Clinton did that led to his impeachment. In that one, he did break the law. He lied under oath. He perjured himself. Richard Nixon's impeachment, which didn't go forward because Richard Nixon had resigned, he clearly was in violation of the law. Here, Donald Trump hasn't broken any laws. And so, what Schiff and the mainstream media are doing is really just outrageous, and it's making a lot of people in our country very angry. I'm one of them, and so I've had the ability to step up and go against this guy, and we're raising small donations from around the country because people cannot stand my opponent.
And your website is Eric Early, your name, not late, early,
yes.
ericearly.com.
Correct.
And what people
yes.
don't realize is the same Shifty Schiff, who with Nancy Pelosi attended a fundraiser hosted by, and wait for this, Ukrainian arms dealer. So tell me it's not corrupt.
Listen, what we're all seeing is that the Democrat Party, and I'm separating these people away from the Democrat voters, okay? Because I believe their elected officials have lost touch with many of their constituents. I know just from talking to people in my district that there are many Democratic voters who think that their elected officials, including Schiff, have just gone way too far in what they're doing in D.C. with the stuff we're seeing, and also the fact that Schiff is essentially abdicated our district for 20 years and done virtually nothing for the people of our district. So, but the Democratic politicians in D.C., we're just learning more and more about the very bad things that they have done and that they continue doing. And one of their tactics is clearly that if they can, shout the loudest and shout the longest, and the mainstream media, of course, helps them do that, that they believe they can cover up all their wrongdoing. From the Obama administration all the way up to President Obama, using the most intrusive evidence and intelligence gathering tools that the world has ever known to spy on the Trump administration and to also spy on the Trump effort to get elected in the first place. That spying makes Watergate look like peanuts. Watergate was the break-in of the opposing party, the DNC's, headquarters in Washington, D.C. Here, the nation's intelligence sources and tools were used to break in to the Trump campaign. Same thing, except much more intrusive breaking in. So that's why I say it makes Watergate look like peanuts. Then you have all the wrongdoing Hillary Clinton did with trying to get dirt on the president from Ukraine. You have, of course, the fact that the Bidens, Joe Biden was a tool of the Chinese and the Ukrainians because the Ukrainians put his son, Biden's son, into a company that was giving him $50,000 a month, and the Chinese actually gave the son, who had no knowledge of anything really in the financial world, $1.5 billion with a B, his company to invest, which means the son must have made a fortune in a commission off of that. So Joe Biden, the dad, was a total tool of the Chinese and the Ukrainians. And, it goes on and on. This is what they're trying. This is what the Democrats, by these actions, and these actions are covering up. And in a fair world, and it is not fair, but in a fair media world, this would be covered. It's not, and instead we're focusing on this phone call to try and impeach a president. So many Americans, there's 63 million of us that voted for President Trump. And most of us, if not all of us, and even more people, think he's doing a really terrific job as president. So, you try and remove a president based on this pretextual BS, which is what Adam Schiff is doing, and you are making a lot of people upset in the country, and that is not a good thing to do. Adam Schiff is a pinhead. He's the kind of guy who should be he's the kind of guy that should be in a back room reading documents and not communicating with people. So he has no clue as to the powerful forces he's unleashing by, his ongoing campaign of insanity.
Well, I know some heads were exploding at Fox News the other day because I was watching Greg Gutfeld, and I love his late show, and he's got a comedian on there that dressed up and put the makeup on. He could have been the twin to Adam Schiff, and it was just hysterical. There's one news outlet that was willing to poke fun at Adam Schiff. I know the execs, after they saw that, probably the heads were all going, boom, a huge explosion. But
yeah.
You touched on a couple of different things, one being the fake news. And, we've had satire as long as man has been able to speak or communicate. There has always been some form of satire. But instead, they're using this fake news, quote, to censure conservative voices. They'll use it to yank your IRS exemption. They're using it against churches. They're using it against anyone and everyone who speaks out against them. Now, this is something that we're going to have to address sooner or later, the freedom of speech, the First Amendment.
Well, I'll tell you, and this is one thing I say on my campaign speeches out here, and what a lot of your listeners may not realize is that in L.A. County alone, we have over 1 million registered Republicans. Unfortunately, many of them have stopped voting out here because they've thrown up their hands and think that it's hopeless to get back our state, and I'm trying my best to energize those voters and get them back in, because if I get as many votes as they can give in my district, it would be obviously tremendously helpful to my campaign. But But when I talk to those audiences, I say, and I really do believe this, I believe we're in a battle of good versus evil in this country right now. And evil has taken a strong foothold in this country, stronger than I can remember in my lifetime. It's being fueled by the mainstream media, and it's to the point now, and then you have these squad members who are essentially controlling the Democrat caucus in the Congress with their socialist agenda and their anti-American agenda. And we have to fight back now harder than ever to get back, to beat back this evil that is trying to take over our country from within. And when evil has a strong foothold, when the good people are being portrayed as the evil ones, and the evil ones are being portrayed as the good ones. And that's what we're seeing right now in our society. We can beat this back, but we're in the fight of we're in one of the biggest fights of many years to protect and preserve the future of our American greatness.
Yeah, protect the republic. And it drives me crazy every time I said the democracy. No, it's a representative republic, a democratically elected republic. We have the rule of law first, not majority rule, which is what we're having right now, a mob rule. And it's gotten so bad that they knew if they could control our faith, our religion, and education, they control us as a society.
Right.
Because you have them now carving out special interest groups, whether it's be transgender, whether it's be Asian Americans or whatever. They're carving us apart and making special interest groups, which is in violation of the Constitution, Article 9.
Well, Schiff is one of these guys that every time he says somebody's doing something wrong, that means that Schiff has done that very thing wrong. That's the way this guy is. He's very good at saying somebody else has broken this or committed this or done that. And one thing you can bet your house on is that if Schiff accuses somebody else of doing that, that means he's the guy who's been the one doing it. He's almost a Stalinist in a way. We're seeing that with the way he's running this star chamber of his, where he doesn't let Trump's side have any attorneys present, for example, when these witnesses are interviewed. I've been a practicing attorney for almost 30 years, and if somebody in a court proceeding took depositions of the opposing party or any witnesses but did not let the other party's lawyer to be present, that the lawyer doing that question would ultimately be disbarred, and all of those depositions that were taken the court would throw them out. So Schiff knows this, but Schiff doesn't care. He claims that they're doing what they're doing now with the whistleblower thing pursuant to their constitutional duties, and that the Republicans who are not quote-unquote participating are not following their constitutional duties. And yet it is Schiff who is violating the Constitution, at every turn. So, we've got to fight back against these people. One of the amazing things that I know all your listeners know, and which we touched on earlier, Schiff for 2 years lied to us, 2 straight years. The man has no credibility whatsoever. And yet, here we go again, and we're supposed to believe this total liar. Well, we haven't forgotten the last 2 years. And when you put this all into context, it makes so clear to people with common sense, people with instinct, people who haven't had those things beaten out of their heads by the mainstream media, which so many people apparently have had happen to them. And it's so obvious that from day one, Schiff and his Pelosi's and that whole group have just been trying to destroy a president that they don't like. But that's not the way America works. A president gets elected, the president has 4 years in office, then there's another election, and the president get reelected or the president can lose. That's the way America works. That's the way we've all been taught growing up, going to school. That's the way America works. And so stop this nonsense, Mr. Schiff. If people don't want President Trump to win again in 2020, they shouldn't vote for him. And if people want him to win again, they will vote for him. I believe he will win, and I believe because of all of this stuff that's going on, I believe more and more people have figured out the joke by now, and I believe President Trump will win again. So, these are the forces at stake here and at play here. And Schiff, I believe, will go down as one of the laughing stocks of history. He is the definition of the word despicable, and I call him a national disgrace.
We're deplorables. He's despicable. That's right.
Okay, that's true. That's true. We are.
To change the subject just a little bit, we're getting whispers of red flag laws, gun control. It's a slippery slope. You have people that are having their firearms taken away from them without even knowing that there is a warrant out there against them, allegations being made. Where is the right to face our accuser before you penalize me? You're getting the penalty first and then finding out that you might have done something wrong, possibly have done something wrong.
Yeah. You've got to allow anybody that owns a gun to have their own due process before anybody tries to take away a gun from them. But these people are having their due process rights blocked, and it's a major problem. And, this is another one of these sort of Stalin-esque tactics. I mean, the president is having his due process rights blocked right now in the investigation we're finding that he's going through, or the inquiry. I believe in due process, and nobody's gun should be taken away without due process. And if they had due process, most likely they'd never have the gun taken away in the first place. And, in this day and age, our Second Amendment rights are even more important than they have been. The Second Amendment wasn't set up to allow people to have guns so they could go hunting. I mean, it's great to have guns to be able to go hunting. Second Amendment was set up to allow the populace to defend itself and protect itself if the government went overboard and out of control and started violating the Constitution and trying to take people's rights away. And we're witnessing those very things right now with this, with the things that we're watching. So these are the times where you need the Second Amendment and you need the protections, and people should be allowed to keep and bear arms. And so, nobody should be allowed to have that stuff taken away from them, and certainly not without due process, which is what many of these red flag laws are trying to do.
It's funny because if they can't get gun control and gun repossession, they'll chip away at things such as, whether or not you have a lock on it, you put it into a safe, or this type of stock is going to be illegal. Multiple rounds are illegal. If they can't get the whole gun, they'll chip it away so much that it's impossible for you to operate that firearm.
Whenever there's a mass shooting, which always spurs the discussions, and the Democrats then go crazy and say everybody's guns should be taken away, I don't even think about the guns. I think about severe mental illness, because there can be no doubt that the person who's just opened fire and killed many innocent people is severely mentally ill, and that's one of the things in this country that's being largely ignored. I know the president has tried to focus on it. He's been ignored. It's a big issue for me. We need to have a place. We know the severely mentally ill out there. I'm not talking about people who, sometimes are depressed or whatever. A severely mentally ill person when you see one. Everybody knows one if they see one. Somebody who's just plain out, flat out nuts. And we have a society right now where when you know somebody like that, there's nothing you can do with them. And, for example, the Parkland shooter in the Florida situation where all those beautiful kids were killed, one of the dads who lost a daughter said the school administration knew the kid who opened fire way before he opened fire. They knew he was trouble. They knew he was nuts. Many kids knew he was nuts. There was nothing they could do with him beforehand. That's what we should be dealing with in this society, is that severe mental illness. The focus should not be on guns. And, there's another subject I want to talk to you about, and that's a big issue for me, and it touches on something you said earlier. We have what I call these social justice warriors, this creeping social justice warrior takeover of our public schools. They're getting in there. They're teaching our kids from the youngest ages anti-American, socialist, racially divisive, anti-Caucasian, anti-God, and over-sexualized stuff. And these kids come out after going through that kind of indoctrination training. They come out the other end, and they end up as the AOCs of the world. And I'm handling a big lawsuit representing great people up here in Santa Barbara, California. We're suing the school district for hiring one of these, paying more than $1 million to one of these social justice warrior organizations. And their agenda that they teach is shocking if you saw their materials. We're doing our best to get the contract thrown out and make sure groups like that will never be brought into the public schools in Santa Barbara again. And if I'm lucky enough to get elected, all of these public school districts get federal funding, lots of federal funding, and I want to hold the federal funding over their heads if they continue hiring these outfits that are a large part of the problem of undermining the greatness of our country from within. It's a big deal to me.
That it is. One of the things you do touch on is the homelessness, because L.A. has exploded. San Francisco, Detroit, New York, massive homelessness, and no one's looking at the root cause of why this is happening. And we'll do anything and everything else, but just don't look at all the urine and feces that you have to step around in the street. You had one homeless guy, as you're talking mentally ill, that pushed a woman into a subway car. Knocks her flat on the ground.
Yeah,
she was doing nothing to him, not even talking to him, looking at him, out of nowhere. We've got to deal with the mental illness, as you said, but finding out why we have this overblown homelessness.
Schiff's fingerprints are all over the homelessness problem here in Los Angeles, which has become epidemic in proportion, epidemic in size, and it's growing. And we have medieval diseases that are threatening to come back because of the flies and the rats and all those kind of things that are starting to multiply out here. And Schiff hasn't done a darn thing about homelessness since he got in office 20 plus years ago. It's exploded on his watch, and it's exploded on the watch of all these Democrats controlling the state for so many years now. They think that they can just take more money in taxes from us to build more housing units, and that will cure homelessness. So they have gotten several $billions now in taxes to build units. So in California, the regulations are so bad it takes forever to even build a housing unit. And so many haven't been built, and the money that they've taxed away from us for these purposes has just been filtered out into all kinds of other things, never been used to build the homes. But the thing is I've walked through Skid Row. I've seen these people firsthand. They're popping up in neighborhoods all over. They're living in tents. Most of these people are, unfortunately, severely mentally ill. These are people that even if there was a housing unit available and the government, paid for their housing permanently and gave them a key to the place, they would not be able to take care of themselves for even a day in these places. And so, again, the severe mental illness has to be addressed. I believe we have to build the nation's mental health care system back up from ground zero because the whole thing has been dismantled. We need to have right now in California, at least, and I'm sure in other states, the largest mental institutions out here are our prisons. Law enforcement's not set up to deal with these people. It's a huge problem. Of course, there's the drug abuse. Out here, we also have the prisons being emptied of felons long before their times expire because of crazy bills put on us by this Democrat cabal. Many of those people are ending on the streets. Also, we have the burdens of illegal immigration. Many of those people ending on the streets. It's a big deal, and the root cause is all of these either Democrat failures to act or policies of actions that have completely backfired on us. In any event, if I'm lucky enough to get elected, it's a big deal to me, and I want to do what I can to help make it go away.
All right, Curtis, you had a question. Go ahead.
Eric.
Yes.
Do you think that Schiff's little impeachment scam will be diluted once the Inspector General results report comes out and Durham's Justice Department probe comes, out, do you think that's going to weaken him?
In a perfect world, it should weaken him. But Washington is completely upside down. And what they will do is, and I think this is another reason why we have this latest impeachment scam, whistleblower scam going on, because they're trying to confuse everybody. And when you put together the Schiff Pelosi whistleblower insanity together with the mainstream media that is fueling it like putting gasoline on a fire, when this IG report comes out, which many of us believe is going to really show the illegal wrongdoing of so many people in the who were running the intelligence agencies back in the day, I think the media and the Schiff Pelosi group are just going to go into hyperdrive on what they're doing, and unfortunately, I think other than outlets, media outlets like this one and like Fox and like the conservative media outlets, One American News, which I'm a big fan of, I think it's going to be thrown in the dustbin mainly by so many of these. So whereas in a normal world that should be used to completely water down what we're dealing with, but we're not in a normal world these days. We're in a world of hyper crazy politicians, and the Dems get to take the lead in that because the mainstream media just loves the narrative. They just love hearing somebody with a fancy title saying something bad about Donald Trump, even if it's completely untrue.
I'm glad you used the word media, not news, because you don't get news anymore unless you turn on a local station and they'll tell you, an accident over here or this person committed this crime. You don't get real news anymore. It's nothing but talking heads. Now, I'm not trained as a journalist. I do not pretend to be a journalist. I try to be as well educated in any subject I talk on. I'm a talking head. I will admit that. But we have moved the media away from telling news to just spouting opinion.
Yeah, what's happened with the mainstream media and the Democrats, they clearly believe they're morally superior than all the rest of us. They think they're smarter, they think they know better than us, and they think they know they know what's best for us, which is, ridiculous given that they are all just the opposite. And yet, because of these beliefs, both the mainstream media and these Democratic politicians, they don't care about the law anymore. They don't care about the Constitution. They don't care about fair and balanced reporting. They don't care about anything because they know what's best for America and for all Americans, according to them. And so they've decided among them that Donald Trump is bad for America, and so they're just going to do whatever they can to get rid of him, even if there's no basis whatsoever in fact or fiction to do so. These are bad times, and this is what happens with the communist-type socialist thinkers of the world. They think they know better than the rest of us, and they will use government and the power of government to control all the rest of us. And that's why, conservatives have to fight harder now than, any time I can remember to roll this back and to roll those people back and to get back to our nation of laws, liberty, independence, and to put these people back where they belong, which is not telling us what to do with our lives.
You hit on a very valid point there, because it used to be, if you were sitting on opposite ends of the political spectrum, you could still sit down and have a civil conversation. Instead, you see people being assaulted, and the person that commits the assault is not even being arrested. Cops are standing there with their hands tied because they've got some boss or some mayor that's telling the cops, don't do your job. We have starting to devolve here.
Yeah, it's we're seeing a lot of bad things going on, and I think one example of what you just referred to is in Portland, where you have Antifa coming out and doing they're just total fascists, and the irony there is that Antifa stands for anti-fascist. So you've got you've got anti-fascists. You've got fascists masquerading around as if they're anti-fascists. And if you try and go against these violent anti-fascists, and fights ensue, you've got the local mayor up there stopping law enforcement from protecting the people that these Antifa people are going after. It's bad news.
No, we need the rule of law back. Just to change the subject just a little bit, we had our previous guest who's running against Lindsey Graham on. He was saying that he would term limit himself. Are you for or against term limits?
I absolutely believe in term limits. I think that the professional political class is what is destroying our country. The founders created this country, and the way they drafted everything was such that people like us, people who are non-politicians, would be able to get into government, bring our expertise to government, and then get the heck out of there. And these professional politicians, they get in there, and what ends up happening is the most important thing to them is staying in power. They will do and say anything to stay in power, and they will do and say anything to destroy those who are trying to take that power from them. And they end up losing complete contact with their constituents, and what's good and best for America ends up getting completely discarded. So I'm a firm believer in term limits.
Yeah, I keep on telling people, contact your elected officials, whether it's the local dog catcher or your U.S. senator, and let your voice be heard. It's so important that we, the electorate, have an interaction with our elected officials. You've got career politicians now going in there as a middle-class person and coming out a billionaire. You've got the Maxine Waters, you've got the Nancy Pelosi's. For some reason, they get the same salary as every other senator, but they come out on the winning side of the bank account.
But, somebody's got to look into where Nancy Pelosi's gotten all her money from, where Maxine Waters gotten all her money from. You can just imagine the corruption that they've been involved in their careers to bankroll the amount of money they bankrolled, given the fact that their salaries are frozen at about $150,000 or so a year. How have these people gotten to become multimillionaires?
Yeah, absolutely. And then you also have people that are clamoring for the $15 minimum wage. And gee, that just backfired on Target, because Target says, we're going to go up to they're right now at $13. We're going to go up to $15. But that person that was working a 40-hour work week just got cut down to 10 hours. So now they have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make the same amount of money they were working at one job. Is this crazy or not?
It is crazy. I know people that own small businesses. I know somebody I was just talking to the other day who owns a restaurant. And he said, and this had been a successful restaurant, he says the 15-hour minimum wage is killing them now, to the point where it's made it tougher to keep the restaurant going. They don't know if they'll be able to continue going that way. But they've also had to lay off a number of people, because before they could have more people working, but now because of the increase in the minimum wage, they can't afford to keep all these people working, who are also being tipped as well. Now, I get it. It sounds great. You want to increase the minimum wage, but the negative repercussions of doing so have a huge impact on businesses, and at the end of the day lead to less people being able to be employed. It also leads to the younger generation being blocked from getting into the workforce, because many business owners don't want to pay $15 an hour to a new young employee, somebody who could come in and learn the ropes and start building up their lives. There's so many unfortunate negative repercussions from these blanket efforts by the far left to take control and tell us what to do. People who have no idea what it takes to run a business, and no idea, what the negative repercussions of their actions will be.
I have to laugh. It's sad, but it's true. Our local McDonald's, the people went out there and picketed the McDonald's. The workers went on strike, saying we want an increase in our minimum wage. And the owner turned around and said, fine, well, I'll pay you more money on the minimum wage, but I want to close down for a couple of months and remodel. And when he opened back up, there were kiosks in place of the people that would have been working there. They lost their job, they lost their benefits, and a $20,000 kiosk can easily replace that $30,000 employee.
Yeah. So, Ann, I'd like to ask if all your listeners who support me in this endeavor of taking Adam Schiff out and sending him into permanent political retirement, if they'd go to my website at ericearly.com, ERICEARLY.com. We take donations of any size. We need as much help as we can. Schiff has been raising millions for years. We need what it takes to pay for the advertising, to wake up the people out here, given that the mainstream media is lying down and just watching it continue, so that we can take the fight to him and win this race. So I want to thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, it has been our pleasure. And there is a link on the show page so that people hit the podcast later on, they can click on it and go directly to your campaign.
Well, thank you. And I will tell your listeners out there, we have more and more people out here starting to open our mouth and fight back. I do believe we're going to eventually take back this state, and we're going to then start rebuilding California from the ground up. And so all your support is needed, but this can be done.
Well, thank you, and God bless for the hard work you do, and good luck. We'll have you back. The closer we get to the election day, we'll have you back.
That'd be great. That'd be great. God bless you, too.
Take care. All right,
Thank
Eric
you.
Early.
Take care.
Check it out,
Bye-bye.
ericearly.com. There's a link on the show page there for you to click on. Man, we got like 15 minutes left. That's it, Curtis. Just want to make a mention, a special shout out to one of our friends of the show, Emery McClendon. He posted something up on Facebook just the other a couple of hours ago. And, you know, I understand his feeling. There's a lot of people that feel down because of the way that, you know, we're being treated in the media, that what you see out there, that we're getting bombarded one after another of angry messages, depressing messages. And he posted, and God bless you, Emery, I'm trying my best to stay positive, he writes, despite the American dream being destroyed right before our eyes. What are you doing to stay sane? And people were writing things such like, I'm turning off the TV, I'm trusting in the Lord, things like that. So I wrote back to Emery because I understand the sentiment. Sometimes you just feel so overwhelmed with the mass media that you get hit with on TV, your smart devices, your radio, wherever you go, you're getting bombarded. And I said, I'm going to stay sane by staying in the fight, trusting in God, staying true to my beliefs in my faith, freedoms, and in our founding fathers' gift of this republic to us and future generations. We can't give up, relax, or bury our heads in the sand. If we do, for one moment, they will win and all will be lost in the end. Revelations reveals that we will win with the power and glory of God if we remain true and faithful. Don't give up. But when overwhelmed, find that quiet place. Regain your equilibrium, strength, courage, determination, and faith. Then stand your ground and fight with every ounce of your being. I hope you people take this to heart. We have a wonderful nation. We have the most fantastic nation in the world. There has never been a government like this with as many freedoms and liberties as we have today. And if we fold up the tent, we may never see it again. We're here for a short time. Use it well. Use it very well. Curtis, what say you?
I say that challenges, the way I look at them, they give me an opportunity to show what I'm made of. You know, you have to stand up for what you believe in, as you said, and you have to be willing to fight for what you believe in. And there will be times when all seems lost. I mean, look at General George Washington, you know, at Valley Forge. I mean, most of his men didn't even have shoes or socks to wear throughout the winter. He could have given up, but he didn't. And that's what, I look at when I feel like the odds are against me. I look at people in our history or throughout history who have faced great, challenges, and they prevailed simply because they stood their ground. They did not give up. So I think, what you said was what we need to hear, You need to stay in the fight.
Oh, absolutely. And you got to remember, during the Revolutionary War, only 10% of the Americans that were living here stood up and fought. Only 10%. And look at what that 10% accomplished. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of these United States, the Bill of Rights. They built the foundations for us. And we've got to expand upon that. They gave us something very strong to stand upon. And it's up to us, the remaining 10% here now, to continue holding down our republic, our freedoms, our liberties, our ability to say whatever you choose to say, and yet be held responsible for your words and actions. Take that responsibility. But instead, we have the Twinkie defense. Oh, the Twinkies are addictive. That's why I weigh 600 pounds. No, you weigh 600 pounds because you did not take personal responsibility and you kept on shoving those Twinkies into your face. This is something that, for some reason, we no longer hold ourselves or anyone else accountable for our words and actions. Look at the violence that we're getting from the Antifa crowd. People just walking down the street, and so what? They're wearing a mega hat. They support Donald Trump. So what? If I saw you walking down the street with an Obama T-shirt or hat, I'm not going to slap you, silly. Hey, that's your opinion. I still see people still driving around with Obama bumper stickers, and I kind of laugh. I think it's funny that he's out of office and no one bothered to take the time to take the bumper sticker off their car. So what? We are entitled to our opinions and our words, but we also must be held accountable for those words and actions. And if you commit violence against another individual because you disagree with who they support or if you disagree with their point of view, if you're violent, then you should be held criminally responsible and charged with assault. But we're not doing that. We're letting people get away with murder.
I believe that the animus that's being taught in the school system towards this country has resulted in these, young people coming out here and being violent or just being so anti-American, like a AOC, and that crowd. They literally hate this country, and that's because of the education that they have, and that's why I always put emphasis on reclaiming our school systems so we can turn this around. And I will always reach that.
Well, not just our school systems, our family units. Statistics prove that if you grow up in a family with both the mother and father in the house, if you have two parents in the house raising that child will more likely end up going on to college, having a family of their own, being prosperous, and, believe it or not, mentally happier than someone that grows up in a single parent house or grows up in foster care. If you have two people participating equally in the raising of that child, teaching them right from wrong, and directing them. The child does not rule the family. It's the parents that rule the family. But instead, our society has started to flip on its head, and we're allowing the kids in the room to control. And no, for every action, you must be held responsible. So if you ignore teaching your child right from wrong, then you should be held responsible for your failure to act as well as whatever act you may take. So, folks, this is what we got to do. We got to bring back moral responsibility to the house, to the family, to the community, and hold our elected officials accountable. Find out who they are. Pick up the phone. Walk into their office. See where they're having a town hall. Show up. Ask the questions, but do so with civil respect. That's my rant for today, Curtis.
We have got to find a way to kill this drug culture that is destroying a lot of families. I mean, that's been prevalent for like the last 20, 30 years to the point that it's really impacting families. I mean, you got children being raised by grandparents who can't really keep up with them because their parents are in jail or in an institution or just out there wandering the streets. And I think that's a national security issue. And I'm not sure how you address that, but one way to do so, I believe, is to find some kind of way to defeat this drug culture that we have.
Well,
stop these drugs from coming in here.
It used to be we had a DEA, we had law enforcement that were able to intercept these things, to take illegal drugs off the street. And when they first started doing that, we had institutions that dealt with mental illness. And because of a series of abuses in the late 60s and 70s, a lot of these institutions were shuttered. And you didn't have the massive homelessness. But over the years, people say mental illness and, ooh, it's the boogeyman. You know, we had doctors, we had medical staff that would look at what was the cause of an individual. You can't put everyone in the same basket. Of an individual's problem, what their mental illness exactly would be, and treat them accordingly. We have shuttered these institutions. We've got to start opening them back up again, getting trained, qualified medical staff back in where we need them to help with this homelessness, to help with the mental illness, and maybe, and just maybe, we can reclaim America. Well, we're down to our last 4.5 minutes, Curtis. That's all I've got for today. Just want to mention, coming up next week, we've got your two friends. No, that's the following week. All right. We got Daphne Barak. She's got a book out, To Plea or Not Plea. She will be joining us. It's possible we'll have Mark Sutherland, a filmmaker, will be joining us. And then the following week, Trump's minister, Pastor Paula White, will be joining us. And then your two friends, Glenda and Royal. So we're lining up. We're booked straight through to mid-month.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to thank everyone that has joined us, whether or not you're here on Blog Talk Radio, Facebook, YouTube, anywhere else you were, Spreaker, up on SHR Media. Want to thank you. We'll be back here next Friday. So, Curtis, I say until then, good night and God bless.
And be safe.
Absolutely.
90 seconds. 60 seconds.